The life of William Howard Taft unfolded across a calm and steady arc of American history, stretching from the post-Civil War decades into the early years of modern Washington. His story was shaped by the rhythms of Cincinnati, by the quiet expectations of a prominent family, and by the evolving landscape of a nation learning to balance industrial growth with public responsibility. Through the late 19th century and into the Progressive era, Taft moved through roles that brought him from local legal chambers to distant administrative posts overseas, and eventually to the highest positions of government. His path was defined not by personal ambition, but by a consistent devotion to service and structure. This documentary follows the entire arc of that journey: his origins, his education, his rise through law and government, his presidency, and his later fulfillment as Chief Justice. Each moment is presented with unhurried attention, designed to settle the mind and guide it gently through history. Listeners who wish to support the continuation of these calm explorations may like the video, subscribe to the channel, or simply share where in the world they are listening from, allowing this quiet journey through time to reach others. In the middle of the 19th century, on a gentle rise above the banks of the Ohio River, the city of Cincinnati lived at the crossroads of a changing nation. Its streets carried the sounds of river commerce and the steady movement of families building new lives in the expanding Midwest. It was in this place, on September 15th, 1857, that William Howard Taft entered the world. His birth took place in a household already connected to public life, yet defined by a quiet sense of duty rather than display. His parents, Alphonso Taft and Louise Torrey Taft, offered a home framed by scholarship, law, and steady expectation. The Taft family had deep New England roots, with long traditions in education and civic responsibility. When Alphonso moved west to Cincinnati, he carried this tradition with him, helping the city develop its cultural and political identity. By the time William was born, Cincinnati had grown into a significant centre of trade and learning, with a temperament shaped by both industrious energy and Midwestern reserve. The Taft household reflected this mixture. It was a place where books lined the walls, where discussions unfolded with calm seriousness, and where children were encouraged to pursue knowledge with patience. William was the second of 5 children, and from his earliest years he was surrounded by the rhythms of a family deeply involved in the life of their community. Alfonso's work as a lawyer and public servant often brought him into contact with the issues that were shaping the United States during Reconstruction. Yet the atmosphere inside the home remained measured and deliberate. The children were taught to value study, integrity, and balance. These lessons, absorbed quietly over time, would guide William throughout his life. Outside the house, the city around him was experiencing its own period of growth. Cincinnati stood as a midpoint between North and South, a place where ideas, goods, and people converged. In the years following the Civil War, it became a hub for manufacturing, transportation, and culture. The young Taft would have observed the movement of steamboats along the river, the expansion of railroads, and the steady rise of new neighborhoods. Though these sights formed the backdrop of his childhood, they did not shape him into a seeker of excitement. Instead, they reinforced his natural preference for order and predictability. His early schooling reflected this inclination. William was not a child of dramatic displays or restless imagination. He approached his lessons with quiet persistence, methodically progressing through each subject. His teachers often noted his reliability, his careful thinking, and the way he seemed naturally inclined toward fairness. He had a sturdy physical presence even in youth, but carried it with an air of gentleness. While other children might have sought attention or mischief, William preferred the comfort of routine and the reassurance of working towards steady improvement. Within the family, Alphonso Taft played a guiding role, not through stern instruction, but through the example of his own life. As a lawyer, judge, and eventually cabinet member at the national level, Alfonso demonstrated a calm, rational approach to public service. William observed how his father balanced professional responsibilities with thoughtful scholarship and a deep belief in civic order. These impressions settled into him gradually, forming the foundation of his own aspirations long before he recognized them as such. Cincinnati itself contributed to this shaping. The city's diverse population, its German and Irish communities, its growing industries, and its cultural institutions all offered William a broad view of American society. Yet he experienced these influences with a characteristically measured temperament. Rather than seeking debate or energetic political activity, he absorbed the environment with a contemplative eye. He developed an appreciation for a structure, whether in the legal system, in education, or in the unfolding civic life around him. As the 1870s progressed, the United States moved through a period of transformation marked by rapid industrialization and shifting political priorities. Though William was still young, these national trends filtered into Cincinnati's daily rhythm. Streets grew busier, businesses expanded, and new institutions emerged. For the Taft family, this meant an increasingly interconnected world of public engagement. Alfonso's responsibilities took him from local practice to national office, serving in positions such as Secretary of War and Attorney General. Each appointment brought new perspectives into the family conversation, exposing William to the workings of government not through pressure, but through steady observation. Even so, his childhood retained a tone of stability. Friends and neighbours often described the Tafts as a calm, intellectually inclined family, comfortable with modest routines and devoted to education. William flourished in this setting, developing habits of diligence that would follow him throughout his career. When he was not studying, he spent time outdoors in the gentle hills surrounding Cincinnati, finding a quiet balance between physical activity and mental focus. These early experiences fostered a sense of proportion that would become one of his defining traits. As he approached adolescence, William began to show a deeper interest in the legal and governmental matters that filled his father's days. He read widely, absorbing the classics, histories, and legal treatises that lined the family library. Although he seldom expressed bold ambitions, those around him noticed his growing intellectual maturity. He possessed a mind inclined toward clarity and order, and he approached questions of policy and law with natural curiosity. By the time he reached the end of his secondary schooling, the direction of William's future had begun to take shape. The influence of Alfonso Taft, the environment of Cincinnati, and the broader national climate all pointed him toward higher education and public service. This path felt less like a decision than a continuation of the world he had always known. A world in which thoughtful study, measured judgment, and quiet responsibility formed the foundation of a meaningful life. The boy who had grown up along the river, watching a changing nation beyond his windows, now prepared to leave home for further study. His next steps would take him into deeper scholarship and beyond the familiar boundaries of Ohio. Yet even as his journey expanded, the calm, steady beginnings of his Cincinnati childhood would remain with him, shaping the man he would become and the historical role he would one day fulfill. The household in which William Howard Taft grew into adolescence carried with it a gentle but unmistakable expectation of civic responsibility. It did not impose this expectation through forceful instruction or strict demands. Instead, it emerged naturally from the daily rhythms of family life, shaped quietly by the steady presence of Alfonso Taft and Louise Torrey Taft. Their home in Cincinnati was a place where learning unfolded almost continuously, where books were handled as comfortably as household tools, and where conversations drifted easily toward questions of law, philosophy, and governance. For William, these influences settled in gradually, forming the background of his early development. Alphonso Taft had built a distinguished legal and political career, yet he carried his responsibilities with calm restraint, preferring thoughtful deliberation to dramatic action. William observed this disposition from an early age. He saw how his father approached each new task with a blend of patience and clarity, how he valued fairness even in the most complex matters, and how public service, in his view, was not a path for personal advancement, but a quiet duty to the broader community. These impressions contributed to William's own sense of purpose long before he articulated it. Louise Taft, a woman of education and steady character, contributed equally to this atmosphere. She guided the children with a balanced mixture of encouragement and structure. Under her influence, William developed habits of disciplined study. He learned to treat each day as an opportunity for improvement, not in a competitive sense, but in a manner rooted in quiet persistence. Louise fostered appreciation for the arts and literature, deepening the intellectual climate of the household. Her calm presence shaped William's early understanding of stability and emotional restraint. The Taft siblings grew up in an environment that emphasized cooperation more than rivalry. William's brothers and sister each followed their own paths, but all shared a familiarity with discussions of law, government, and moral responsibility. In this setting, William learned to articulate his thoughts carefully and to listen with equal attention. He seldom sought to dominate conversation. Instead, he absorbed the nuances of each topic, cultivating a reflective style that would characterize his leadership in later life. Outside the home, the world of Cincinnati in the 1860s and 1870s offered a complementary setting for growth. It was a city defined by transition, recovering from the Civil War, expanding its industries, and developing new cultural institutions. Schools were improving, civic organizations were forming, and the population was becoming more diverse. These developments created a landscape of opportunity for the city's youth. William encountered this environment with characteristic composure. While some children might have been swept into the energetic changes around them, he approached each new experience with steady curiosity rather than excitement. His academic progress during these years reflected both environment and temperament. William demonstrated an aptitude for systematic thinking, gravitating naturally towards subjects that required organization and logical reasoning. Mathematics, classical languages, and history appealed to him. Teachers noted his ability to maintain focus for long periods, working through problems methodically and without impatience. This trait distinguished him from classmates who excelled through quick flashes of insight. William's strength lay in consistency, a trait that would become increasingly evident as he matured. Physical activity also played a role in shaping his early character. William grew into a broad-shouldered, sturdy youth, capable of performing demanding tasks without complaint. Although he did not pursue athletics with the intensity that would mark later generations, he enjoyed outdoor exercise and understood the importance of caring for his health. These habits brought balance to his daily life, reinforcing the equilibrium between mind and body that his parents encouraged. Meanwhile, the public career of Alphonso Taft progressed steadily, exposing the family to experiences beyond Cincinnati. His appointments to national office carried him to Washington, D.C., and his later diplomatic roles took him overseas. During these periods, the Taft household adapted to changing circumstances with quiet resilience. For William, these transitions introduced new perspectives on national and international affairs. They also revealed the broader reach of public service, suggesting that the responsibilities of leadership extended far beyond familiar surroundings. Yet despite these external influences, the family maintained a steady centre in Cincinnati. William continued his education in local schools, forming friendships and community ties that grounded him. His peers often described him as even-tempered and reliable, someone who rarely displayed frustration or impatience. Yeah, he was not inclined toward theatrics or emotional outbursts. Instead, he carried himself with a calmness that seemed natural rather than cultivated. These qualities made him well liked, though not always widely noticed. He preferred modesty to attention. As he advanced through his studies, William's intellectual interests became more defined. Law, government, and the structure of institutions held particular appeal. He found satisfaction in understanding how systems functioned, how rules shaped orderly societies, and how individuals contributed to collective stability. This orientation set him apart from classmates who pursued more expressive or imaginative fields. William respected the creative arts, but his own nature drew him toward paths grounded in logic and structure. His father's example remained a constant source of guidance. Alfonso's service as a judge, cabinet official, and diplomat illustrated the many ways in which legal training could lead to broader civic responsibilities. Although Alfonso never imposed these expectations on his son, William absorbed them naturally. He saw the dignity of the courtroom, the seriousness of governmental decision-making, and the quiet rewards of a life devoted to public duty. These impressions encouraged him to view education not simply as preparation for a profession, but as foundation for contributing to society. The wider social context of the era reinforced this sense of purpose. The United States was navigating the complexities of Reconstruction, the uncertainties of regional identity, and the challenges of expanding industrialization. Conversations about citizenship, federal authority, and economic growth were common in households like the Tafts, where public affairs were part of daily awareness. William processed these developments with thoughtful attention, learning to understand them not as distant events, but as interconnected elements of national life. By his mid-teens, William had developed a pattern of balanced living, rising early, applying himself to his studies, participating in modest social activities, and maintaining a dependable routine. This steadiness was not the result of rigid discipline. Rather, it arose from an internal disposition toward order. Those who knew him sensed that he possessed an inner calm that guided his decisions. He was approachable, considerate, and unaffected by personal ambition. These characteristics made him a reassuring presence in any setting. As graduation from secondary school approached, William's academic achievements reflected his years of dedicated effort. He had not chased first rankings through competition, yet his consistent performance placed him among the strongest students in his cohort. His teachers recognized not only his intellectual competence, but also the sound judgment he displayed in discussions and written work. They understood that his strengths would continue to develop in an environment where scholarship, discipline, and civic purpose converged. The time arrived for William to consider the next step in his education. His father's experience, combined with his own academic inclinations, pointed naturally toward higher study at a distinguished institution. The path ahead would lead him beyond Cincinnati and into a broader academic world. Though he approached the transition with typical composure, it marked a quiet turning point in his life. He was leaving the familiar setting that had shaped his character, entering a phase where his abilities would be tested in new ways. Yet as he prepared for this next chapter, the lessons of his childhood remained firmly in place. The value of patience, the importance of fairness, the steadiness required for a life in public service. These early principles, absorbed gradually and without dramatic moment, would accompany William Howard Taft throughout his journey. They formed the underlying structure of a life that would later influence national institutions and shape the course of American governance. When William Howard Taft left his family home in Cincinnati to pursue higher study, he stepped quietly into a new environment that would shape both his intellect and his sense of direction. The journey to Yale College carried him from the familiar streets of the Ohio River Valley to the older, more settled world of New England scholarship. Though the distance was considerable, the transition unfolded without sudden disruption. William approached the change with the same steadiness that had defined his early years, ready to absorb the experience with patience and curiosity. Yale in the late 19th century was an institution steeped in tradition. Its libraries, courtyards, and lecture halls reflected an academic heritage built over generations. Students came from across the country, bringing with them a wide range of backgrounds and ambitions. Some arrived with aspirations of public life, or others with dreams of scholarship or commerce. The atmosphere was intellectually vigorous, yet the pace of life retained a sense of order. For William, this blend of energy and structure suited him well. He found in Yale a place where discipline and measured progress were valued, where learning grew not from competition alone but from careful study sustained over time. During his early months on campus, William adjusted gradually to the expectations of college life. He observed the customs of the institution, the daily routines, and the quiet rigour that guided its academic culture. Unlike some students who felt a need to establish themselves quickly, William approached each new setting with composure. He attended his classes faithfully, studied consistently, and participated in activities that strengthened both his mind and character. Where his reserved manner did not diminish his engagement, it simply reflected an approach grounded in modesty and thoughtful attention. Academically, he excelled through persistence rather than dramatic insight. Courses in mathematics, classical languages, and history appealed strongly to him. He respected the precision of logical argument and appreciated the clarity that came from disciplined thinking. Professors began to notice his reliability and his steady improvement. Though he did not dominate discussions, he contributed when he felt he had something meaningful to add, speaking with deliberation and avoiding unnecessary flourish. Over time, classmates recognized him as someone whose words carried weight precisely because he chose them carefully. Physical activity also played an important part in his college life. Yale encouraged participation in exercise as a complement to academic development, and William responded positively to this balance. His broad frame and natural strength suited him well to athletics. He practiced regularly, finding satisfaction in steady training rather than competitive pursuit of acclaim. The combination of study and physical exertion helped maintain the equilibrium that had characterized his upbringing. It offered a rhythm to his days, reinforcing the connection between clear thinking and healthy discipline. Socially, William moved in circles that appreciated sincerity and dependability more than display. He formed friendships grounded in mutual respect, many of which would endure throughout his life. Among these relationships were figures who would later become influential in politics, law, and public affairs. In these early years, however, the connections developed without urgency, growing slowly through shared experiences and thoughtful conversation. William's ability to listen attentively made him a reassuring presence, and his even temperament earned him the trust of those around him. As his studies continued, William's intellectual interests sharpened. He developed a particular appreciation for fields that required structured reasoning, especially law and political philosophy. The stability of legal systems, the purpose of institutions, and the principles of governance resonated with him. These subjects offered a clear sense of order, aligning closely with the values he had absorbed in childhood. Though he was not yet committed to a specific career path, the direction of his thinking became increasingly apparent. Yale also gave him opportunities to refine his leadership qualities in quiet, understated ways. He became involved in student organizations that emphasized scholarship and disciplined conduct. His participation was not marked by bold speeches or public ambition. Instead, he guided discussions calmly, approached responsibilities methodically, and encouraged cooperation among peers. His leadership emerged through steadiness rather than charisma, reflecting an internal consistency that others came to respect. The faculty at Yale, many of whom possess long experience in shaping future leaders, recognized in William a blend of humility and discipline that indicated potential for significant service. They observed how he worked through complex material with patience, how he balanced academic life with physical activity, and how he maintained a grounded perspective amid the pressures of college expectations. Their encouragement reinforced his growing sense that his future lay in a field connected to law, administration, or governance. During breaks from school, William often returned to Cincinnati, where he reconnected with family and reflected on his experiences. These periods offered a reassuring continuity with his childhood, reminding him of the values that had shaped his early character. Conversations with his father deepened his understanding of public life and introduced him to new legal and political ideas. Yet these discussions unfolded without pressure. Alphonso Taft believed deeply in allowing his children to discover their own paths, and William approached each conversation with gratitude rather than obligation. As William progressed toward graduation, his academic record demonstrated consistent excellence. He ranked near the top of his class, not through aggressive pursuit of distinction, but through steadfast work that accumulated naturally over time. Professors regarded him as a model of disciplined scholarship, and classmates viewed him as steady, fair-minded, and quietly capable. These perceptions reflected the essence of his character, a person who advanced not by force, but by reliability. Graduation from Yale marked a transition rather than a culmination. William left the college with deepened intellectual habits, strengthened friendships, and a clearer sense of direction. The environment had nurtured his inclination toward the law, offering him both theoretical and practical foundations for further study. Yet he felt no rush toward accomplishment. His nature inclined him toward gradual progress, seeking understanding before ambition and structure before advancement. The completion of his undergraduate years led naturally to the next phase of his education. Yale's law school offered an extension of the discipline he had come to appreciate, and its emphasis on rigorous reasoning aligned closely with his strengths. Entering legal study would allow him to explore the frameworks that supported orderly societies, deepen his comprehension of justice, and prepare him for future roles in public service. As he prepared for this new chapter, William reflected quietly on the path he had travelled. His early life in Cincinnati, his family's example, and his years at Yale had woven together to create a stable foundation. He carried with him a deep respect for measured judgment, a belief in the value of institutions, and a commitment to steady improvement. These qualities would shape not only his legal career, but also the manner in which he approached every stage of his life. In the calm environment of New Haven, amid the libraries and lecture halls that had become familiar, William Howard Taft completed his undergraduate studies with a sense of readiness, firm, unhurried, and grounded. His experiences at Yale had refined his natural tendencies, guiding him toward a future aligned with responsibility and structure. Though he could not yet foresee the extent of his public service, the foundations of that journey were already fully in place, preparing him for the deeper challenges and broader horizons that awaited him. When William Howard Taft returned to Cincinnati after completing his studies at Yale, he stepped once more into the familiar contours of the city where he had spent his childhood. The streets, the river, and the quiet neighborhoods were unchanged in many of their essential rhythms, yet William returned to them with a deeper sense of purpose. His years of disciplined study had prepared him for the work ahead, and he arrived with a clear intention: to begin the practical training that would shape him into a capable lawyer. Though he approached this new phase with characteristic humility, he carried within him the steady confidence that came from years of careful preparation. The process of entering the legal profession in the late 18th century blended formal instruction with practical apprenticeship. William enrolled in the University of Cincinnati College of Law, where he deepened his understanding of legal theory, procedure, and history. At the same time, he sought opportunities to observe the routines of local courts and learn from experienced practitioners. He recognized that law was not only a matter of principles, but also a profession grounded in precision, patience, and the ability to interpret complex circumstances with fairness. His studies advanced steadily. He read widely in areas of torts, contracts, and constitutional law, paying careful attention to the ways in which legal precedents developed over time. Professors noted his methodical approach to every subject. He didn't rush through material. Instead, he examined each point thoroughly, and testing it against examples and refining his understanding until he could articulate it with clarity. In discussions, he continued to demonstrate the reflective style that had earned him respect at Yale, speaking only after careful consideration and offering contributions marked by balance rather than assertion. As he progressed toward completing his legal education, William also began to take on responsibilities within local legal networks. Cincinnati's legal community was well established, with firms and courts that played important roles within the region. William's family connections, combined with his growing reputation for reliability, helped him secure introductions to figures who would guide his early professional development. These relationships were formed not through aggressive pursuit, but through the quiet trust he inspired in others. In 1880, shortly after completing his formal training, William was admitted to the Ohio bar. This accomplishment marked a significant turning point. Though he accepted it with modesty, he understood the responsibility carried by the profession. His goal was not to pursue dramatic cases or seek rapid advancement. Rather, he aimed to build a career rooted in fairness and reasoned judgment. William began practicing law in Cincinnati, joining a local firm where he was introduced to the daily demands of the profession. The work was steady and unhurried, offering him opportunities to apply his academic training to real situations. He handled a range of matters typical for a young attorney: property disputes, contractual issues, and legal questions arising from the city's growing commercial activity. Though the nature of these cases was often ordinary, William approached each one with seriousness. He believed that justice depended on careful attention to detail, regardless of the scale of the matter at hand. In court, he presented arguments with clarity and restraint. Observers noted that he did not seek to overwhelm judges with forceful rhetoric. Instead, he relied on the strength of well-organized reasoning. His manner reflected a natural preference for structure over persuasion and principle over performance. In a legal culture that often rewarded dramatic flair, William's calm approach set him apart. Judges appreciated the precision of his arguments, and fellow attorneys recognized the quiet competence behind his work. During these early years, William also gained valuable experience in public administration. In 1881, he was appointed assistant prosecutor for Hamilton County. The role introduced him to the responsibilities of representing the public interest, an area of law that resonated strongly with his sense of civic duty. As assistant prosecutor, he prepared cases, evaluated evidence, and contributed to decisions that carried weight within the community. He learned to balance the need for fairness with the demands of the legal system, always mindful of the importance of measured judgment. His performance in this position revealed qualities that would later define his larger career. He demonstrated a deep respect for procedure, a commitment to impartiality, and an ability to navigate complex matters without losing sight of fundamental principles. Colleagues trusted him, recognizing that he approached each case not with ambition, but with a sincere desire to fulfill the responsibilities of his office. These traits strengthened his reputation within Cincinnati's legal circles, opening the door to further opportunities. In 1882, William's career took another step forward when he was appointed to fill a vacancy as a judge on the Cincinnati Superior Court. He was only 25 years old, unusually young for such a position, yet those familiar with his work understood that he possessed the temperament necessary for judicial service. He approached the role with seriousness and humility, aware that the decisions he rendered would influence the lives of individuals and the community. On the bench, William's style reflected his natural inclination toward fairness and order. He listened carefully to arguments from both sides, asked questions to clarify uncertainties, and took time to consider each matter thoroughly before issuing judgments. His written opinions were clear, well-reasoned, and grounded in established legal principles. Though he did not seek publicity, his work gained quiet respect. Lawyers appearing before him noted the consistency of his rulings and the absence of personal bias. His impartiality reinforced public trust in the court, and his steady presence contributed to the dignity of the judicial process. These early judicial experiences deepened William's understanding of the law as an instrument of stability. He recognized that legal decisions must rest on a foundation of fairness, that the role of a judge required not only knowledge but also patience and restraint. The responsibility suited him. He found satisfaction in bringing clarity to disputes, in applying established principles to new circumstances, and in contributing to the maintenance of order within his community. At the same time, he continued to navigate the complexities of life outside the courtroom. He remained connected to his family, participated in the social and civic life of Cincinnati, and maintained friendships that had begun during his years at Yale. These relationships offered balance to his professional responsibilities, grounding him in familiar routines and reinforcing the steadiness that defined his character. As the 1880s progressed, William's career advanced with consistent momentum. He gained experience not only in law but also in administration, preparing him for roles that would require broader oversight and more complex decision-making. He did not seek these opportunities actively. Instead, they emerged naturally, shaped by his reputation for reliability and the trust of those who recognized his abilities. By the end of the decade, it had become clear that William Howard Taft's early legal career had laid a strong foundation for future service. His years of practice, his experience as a prosecutor, and his work as a judge had refined his skills, strengthened his judgment, and confirmed his commitment to public responsibility. Though he remained modest in his aspirations, the trajectory of his life was beginning to take shape, pointing him toward positions of increasing significance. Yet for the moment he continued to work quietly within the familiar surroundings of Cincinnati, and deepening his understanding of the law and preparing without urgency for the expanded horizons that would soon come into view. As the 1880s unfolded, William Howard Taft's quiet ascent through the legal world of Cincinnati began to draw the attention of those who oversaw the workings of local and state government. His reputation as a thoughtful judge, his even temperament, and his unwavering respect for procedure made him a natural candidate for higher responsibilities. Though he had never sought prominence, his steady work made an impression on colleagues who recognized in him a rare combination of intellect, patience, and integrity. These qualities would soon open the door to a broader field of public administration. The transition from local judicial service to more expansive government roles occurred gradually, these shaped by opportunities that arose through public need rather than personal ambition. Taft had already demonstrated his capacity for balanced judgment in the courtroom, and this experience prepared him for responsibilities that required both legal insight and administrative skill. Those who recommended him for new positions understood that he approached every task with deliberate care, always mindful of the structures that supported orderly governance. During this period, the state of Ohio was modernizing its systems, improving its institutions, and refining the organization of its courts. Taft's work as a superior court judge had shown that he could manage not only the interpretation of the law, but also the broader concerns of judicial administration. He handled his docket efficiently, wrote decisions with clarity, and maintained a courtroom atmosphere marked by fairness and quiet authority. These traits were noticed by leaders at the state and federal levels, who saw in him a potential contributor to the wider machinery of government. In 1887, he accepted appointment as Solicitor General of the United States, a role that required him to argue cases before the Supreme Court on behalf of the federal government. Though this position brought him to Washington, his approach to the opportunity remained characteristic: unhurried, modest, and grounded in the belief that public office was a duty rather than a distinction. His new responsibilities placed him within the orbit of national decision-making, where the actions of government carried implications far beyond any single community. As Solicitor General, Taft prepared meticulously for each case. He studied the legal questions thoroughly, examined the precedents with care, and formed arguments that reflected both precision and restraint. Those who observed him before the court noted the clarity of his presentations. He did not seek rhetorical flourish or dramatic effect. Instead, he offered steady, reasoned explanations supported by well-structured analysis. His manner suited the dignity of the institution, and his reliability earned the respect of the justices. The cases he handled reveal the breadth of federal concerns in the late 19th century. Issues of interstate commerce, taxation, and constitutional interpretation appeared frequently before the court, reflecting a nation still adjusting to the rapid developments of industry and expansion. Taft approached each matter with attention to both legal principle and practical outcome. He understood that the role of government counsel was to uphold the law as written, not to pursue personal preference. This grounding in neutrality would later prove essential as his career continued to develop. His time in Washington also placed him in contact with established figures in national administration. The experience broadened his understanding of the interconnected systems that shape the country, from legal processes to executive responsibilities, and exposed him to new perspectives on public service. Yet he remained unmoved by the political currents that flowed around him. Though many in the capital advanced their positions through alignment with particular factions, Taft maintained a posture of quiet independence, of focusing on his work rather than the politics that surrounded it. After completing his term as Solicitor General, Taft returned to Ohio to serve as a judge on the newly established United States Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit. This position represented a natural continuation of his judicial career, offering him the opportunity to shape federal jurisprudence with the steadiness he'd displayed in earlier roles. The work required careful review of trial records, detailed analysis of legal arguments, and the composition of opinions that would contribute to the development of federal law across multiple states. His years on the Court of Appeals deepened his reputation as a jurist of uncommon balance. He maintained a disciplined routine, devoting long hours to reading, writing, and reflection. His opinions were marked by an unwavering commitment to clarity and consistency. Rather than seeking to break new ground through bold judicial innovation, he focused on interpreting the law faithfully, guided by precedent and principle. His colleagues valued his insight and his willingness to engage in deliberate discussion. Even when disagreements arose, Taft treated each differing perspective with respect, understanding that thoughtful debate strengthened the judicial process. During this period, he also developed administrative experience that extended beyond the courtroom. As the federal judiciary expanded, questions arose concerning the organization of the courts, the distribution of caseloads, and the methods for ensuring efficiency. Taft contributed to these discussions with his characteristic attention to detail. He understood that the strength of the judiciary depended not only on legal reasoning, but also on the structure that supported its operation. His observations helped shape early efforts to improve administrative coordination, foreshadowing the more extensive reforms he would undertake in later stages of his life. Meanwhile, his personal life continued to unfold with quiet stability. In 1886, he married Helen Heron, known as Nellie, whose intelligence and ambition complemented William's steadiness. Their partnership formed a strong foundation for the years ahead. Nellie possessed a keen interest in politics and public affairs, and her enthusiasm encouraged William to consider roles that extended beyond the judiciary. Though he remained cautious about pursuing overtly political paths, her influence broadened his horizons and encouraged him to recognize the possibilities that lay before him. Taft's growing experience in federal administration soon attracted the attention of leaders in the executive branch. His reputation for balanced judgment, his familiarity with legal structures, and his administrative insight made him an appealing candidate for positions that required both leadership and discretion. When national leaders sought an individual capable of managing complex responsibilities with calm consistency, Taft's name frequently appeared among those recommended. One such opportunity emerged in connection with the US Department of Justice, where discussions of legal organization and federal oversight were becoming increasingly important in an era of expanding national institutions. Taft's understanding of judicial procedure and his experience in appellate work positioned him well to offer guidance on matters of significant consequence. Though he accepted these responsibilities with humility, each new role strengthened his presence within the sphere of public administration. He remained guided by a belief that government service demanded impartiality, patience, and a willingness to place public duty above personal preference. These values shaped not only his decisions, but also the quiet certainty that others perceived in him. By the early 1890s, Taft had established himself as a figure whose judgment could be relied upon at the local, state, and federal levels. His work reflected a coherent philosophy that the stability of society required clear laws, effective institutions, and leaders who approached their tasks with steady dedication. His transition from a young lawyer in Cincinnati to a respected voice in national administration had unfolded gradually, shaped by circumstance, opportunity, and his own enduring commitment to service. Yet the path ahead would extend far beyond the boundaries of the courtroom. New responsibilities awaited him, ones that would carry him overseas, deepen his administrative experience, and eventually guide him toward positions of national leadership. For now, however, his entry into public administration stood as a significant step, marking the beginning of a life increasingly intertwined with the broader workings of American governance. By the early 1890s, William Howard Taft had already established himself as a figure of uncommon steadiness within the American legal system. His years as a judge on the United States Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit had refined his ability to approach difficult questions with balance and clarity. His opinions carried the unmistakable imprint of careful thought, and his colleagues recognized in him a jurist whose temperament suited the calm, continuous work of interpreting the law. As national attention began to shift toward the need for a more organized and responsive judiciary, Taft's experience positioned him naturally for roles that would draw on both his intellectual discipline and his capacity for patient administrative leadership. Within the Sixth Circuit, Taft presided over cases that reflected the changing nature of American society at the end of the 19th century. Issues surrounding industrial expansion, labor disputes, interstate commerce, and the boundaries of federal authority appeared frequently on the docket. The country was undergoing rapid transformation, and the courts were often required to mediate between emerging economic forces and long-standing legal principles. Taft approached each case with deliberate care, seeking to interpret the law in a manner that preserved fairness while acknowledging the practical realities at hand. His ability to balance these considerations quietly strengthened his reputation among judges and attorneys across the region. His work on the appellate bench also gave him opportunities to refine skills beyond the writing of opinions. As the responsibilities of the federal judiciary expanded, questions emerged concerning how the courts could operate more efficiently. Taft understood that justice required not only sound legal reasoning but also thoughtful organisation. He observed the workloads of the courts, the distribution of appeals, and the procedural challenges that slowed judicial processes. Rather than proposing bold or sweeping reforms, he offered measured insights rooted in experience. His suggestions focused on strengthening coordination, improving the flow of cases, and ensuring that decisions rested on thorough and timely review. These contributions helped lay the groundwork for the administrative improvements he would later champion on a national scale. Throughout these years, Taft maintained a consistent routine that underscored his methodical nature. He divided his time between reading records, considering arguments, writing opinions, and participating in discussions with fellow judges. His work unfolded with a quiet rhythm that allowed him to approach each matter without haste. Those who observed him noted his ability to remain composed even when facing complex or contentious legal issues. His colleagues appreciated that he considered each case fully, refusing to allow external pressures to influence his judgments. This calm steadiness deepened the trust placed in him, further reinforcing his suitability for higher responsibilities. Though his judicial work formed the centre of his professional life, Taft's world during this period extended beyond the courtroom. His marriage to Nellie Herron continued to provide a source of stability and intellectual companionship. Nellie's interest in politics and her expansive sense of national possibility broadened William's perspective, and even as he remained naturally inclined toward the structured environment of the judiciary. Their home life offered a quiet balance to the demands of his position, enriching his days with thoughtful conversation and a shared commitment to service. Her encouragement would, in time, influence decisions that led him far beyond the bench, though such development still lay just beyond the horizon of these early years. As Taft's reputation continued to grow, he became increasingly involved in discussions concerning the direction of federal legal policy. The strength of his insights and his moderate disposition attracted the attention of those at the highest levels of government. His earlier service as Solicitor General had already acquainted him with the Supreme Court of the United States, and his appellate work gave him a broader understanding of the challenges faced by the judiciary at multiple levels. These experiences formed a foundation of knowledge that made him a valuable voice in shaping conversations about judicial structure, even though he remained outwardly modest about his contributions. One area of particular significance involved the relationship between federal courts and the evolving regulatory environment of the country. As industries grew and interstate transactions became more complex, questions arose regarding the proper role of the government in overseeing business practices. Courts were frequently called upon to determine the extent of federal power, to interpret new statutes, and to address disputes arising from a rapidly modernizing economy. And Taft's approach to these matters was guided by a belief in steady interpretive principles. He resisted efforts to stretch the law beyond its intended scope, yet he acknowledged the necessity of adapting legal understanding to new circumstances when warranted by constitutional authority. His balanced approach helped shape consistent jurisprudence during a period of intense national change. During this time, Taft also continued to build relationships with leading figures in federal administration. One such figure was Theodore Roosevelt, whose rising influence in national politics intersected periodically with Taft's judicial and administrative work. Though their temperaments differed, Roosevelt being energetic and forceful, Taft steady and deliberate, the mutual respect between them grew gradually. Roosevelt saw in Taft someone who could be trusted to carry out responsibilities with integrity, while Taft recognized in Roosevelt a leader whose enthusiasm for reform could bring meaningful improvements to public institutions. Their connection would eventually shape the trajectory of Taft's future, though at this stage it remained only a quiet thread in the wider fabric of his career. As the 1890s approached their close, Taft found himself increasingly acknowledged as one of the most capable jurists in the country. His work was widely regarded for its clarity, fairness, and adherence to principle. Yet he remained free of the ambition often associated with public prominence. He felt most comfortable in roles that allowed him to apply the law thoughtfully, without the pressures of political competition or public spectacle. Those closest to him understood that his sense of vocation lay in the orderly processes of the judiciary, processes that rewarded patience and deep understanding rather than the pursuit of personal distinction. Still, change was approaching. The United States was expanding its presence on the international stage, and the close of the Spanish-American War in 1898 brought new administrative responsibilities to the federal government. Among these responsibilities was the task of organizing civil governance in recently acquired territories. As leaders in Washington considered candidates capable of guiding such efforts, Taft's name appeared with increasing frequency. His experience in law, his administrative insight, and his calm disposition made him an appealing choice for positions requiring both authority and restraint. The possibility of leaving the judiciary for administrative service introduced a moment of reflection in Taft's life. He valued the courtroom deeply and saw the bench as the natural home for his talents. Yet he also recognized that public service sometimes required individuals to step beyond personal preference in order to meet the needs of the country. As he considered his future, he remained guided by the principles that had shaped his path since youth: patience, fairness, and a belief that stable governance depended on steady leadership. By the end of this period, Taft stood at a point where past experience met future possibility. His rise through the judiciary had prepared him for challenges that extended beyond the legal field, and the years ahead would draw him into an increasingly complex world of national and international responsibility. Though he did not yet know the direction his life would take, the calm and deliberate manner in which he had approached each stage of his career would continue to guide him, forming a continuous thread through all that lay ahead. As the 19th century drew toward its close, William Howard Taft found himself standing at a quiet turning point. His years on the appellate bench had given him a deeper understanding of the law's structure, and his measured approach to each case had shaped his reputation into one of national regard. Yet even as he maintained his commitment to the judiciary, the world beyond his chambers began to call upon him in new and unforeseen ways. This call did not arrive suddenly, nor did it appear as a dramatic break with the past. It emerged gradually through the recognition that his balanced temperament and administrative insight were needed in a broader sphere of public life. The federal government, facing new responsibilities after the nation's recent conflict abroad, sought leaders who could be trusted to build stable structures in unfamiliar settings. The conclusion of the Spanish-American War in 1898 had reshaped the nation's obligations, leaving the country to oversee territories newly placed under American administration. The task required individuals capable of translating legal principles into practical governance. It demanded patience, judgment, and a steady hand, qualities Taft had demonstrated throughout his career. As discussions unfolded in the capital, leaders began to consider him for roles that extended beyond the judicial boundaries he'd known. Messages arrived from Washington, inviting him to advise on matters of administration, and to consider positions that would require relocation to the nation's political centre. The invitations did not appeal to personal ambition. Rather, they touched upon his long-standing devotion to public duty. Though he did not seek such opportunities on his own, he recognised that the responsibilities placed before him carried significance for the nation's future. The prospect of leaving the bench prompted careful reflection. Taft valued his judicial work deeply. It had provided structure, purpose, and a sense of fulfilment grounded in the steady interpretation of law. Yet he also understood that service sometimes required movement between roles, each contributing to the broader stability of the country. In conversations with family and trusted colleagues, he weighed the comfort of his current position against the needs expressed by the federal government. These discussions unfolded calmly, guided by the measured reason that shaped all of his decisions. His eventual acceptance of a national administrative role came with a sense of duty rather than excitement. In early correspondence with officials, he expressed willingness to serve wherever the government believed he could be of use. This posture reflected not only humility, but also the clear internal principle that public responsibility must take precedence over personal preference. When the call came to assume an executive position related to overseas administration, Taft agreed with characteristic steadiness, in understanding that the work ahead would be demanding in ways different from his judicial responsibilities. Before he departed for assignments abroad, Taft spent time in Washington, D.C., acquainting himself with the administrative details of his new responsibilities. The capital presented a world distinct from the judicial environment to which he was accustomed. Government departments occupied grand buildings, where decisions flowed through interwoven networks of officials, clerks, and advisors. The city's avenues bore the marks of political energy, shifting alliances, evolving priorities, and the constant movement of ideas that shaped national policy. Although Taft found these surroundings more active than the setting of the courtroom, he remained centred within his own steady rhythm, approaching each task with quiet seriousness. The leaders who welcomed him into federal service respected his careful mind and trusted his intentions. They saw in him someone capable of anchoring new administrative systems with fairness and order. Taft, for his part, listened attentively to their explanations, reviewed documents with patient precision, and sought to understand the complexities of the responsibilities he was preparing to assume. His approach to learning these new duties resembled his method of approaching legal cases. He examined each detail thoroughly, identified the structural principles involved, and considered the practical implications of decisions that would soon rest in his hands. During these preparatory months, he also observed how the executive branch functioned on a daily basis. He attended meetings that illuminated the challenges faced by policymakers, from questions of international relations to matters of economic oversight. He gained insight into the processes through which laws were implemented and policies shaped. Though the atmosphere differed markedly from the judicial world, he recognized familiar patterns: the necessity of clear reasoning, the importance of institutional continuity, and the need for decisions anchored in principle rather than expedience. Taft's presence in the capital also brought him into closer contact with individuals who would influence the next chapters of his career. Among these were national leaders who admired his balanced temperament and his ability to work cooperatively within established systems. Their confidence in him would later shape his path in meaningful ways, though he did not yet foresee the extent of those connections. For the moment, he focused on mastering the responsibilities before him, preparing for the administrative tasks that would soon take him far from home. As he moved through these early stages of national service, Taft demonstrated a capacity for adaptation that surprised even some who knew him well. Though naturally inclined toward the quiet order of judicial life, he adjusted smoothly to the demands of executive administration. He approached each new responsibility as a continuation of his long-standing belief in the importance of structured governance. He understood that legal principles did not exist in isolation. They required practical application through institutions capable of sustaining fairness and stability. His preparation for departure included meetings with military officers, diplomats, and civil administrators whose experience had shaped the implementation of federal policy abroad. Taft listened with respect, absorbing their perspectives and asking questions that revealed his careful thought. He recognized that the responsibilities awaiting him extended beyond the familiar boundaries of American law, touching upon cultural, social, and political dimensions that demanded thoughtful sensitivity. His ability to approach these matters with humility allowed him to learn quickly and to appreciate the complexities he would soon encounter. Before leaving the capital, Taft also made arrangements for his judicial work to continue smoothly in his absence. He cared deeply about the proper functioning of the courts and took steps to ensure that his colleagues would face no undue burden. This attention to detail reflected his enduring commitment to the institutions he served. Even as he prepared to assume entirely new responsibilities, he remained mindful of the duties he was leaving behind. When the time came for him to begin his administrative assignment overseas, Taft did so without fanfare. There were no public declarations, no celebrations marking his departure. Instead, he transitioned into his new role with the quiet steadiness that had characterized every stage of his life. He understood that the work ahead would require patience, insight, and a willingness to address unfamiliar challenges. Yet he also recognized that the principles guiding him, fairness, clarity, and devotion to public service, remained constant, regardless of the environment in which he applied them. As his ship prepared to leave the shores of the United States, Taft reflected on the path that had brought him to this moment. From his childhood home in Cincinnati to the lecture halls of New Haven, from local courts to the federal bench, each stage had unfolded with a sense of gradual progression. Now he was stepping into a wider world where his administrative skills would be tested on an international scale. Though the journey ahead was uncertain, his temperament allowed him to meet it without anxiety. He carried with him the knowledge that steady leadership could bring structure even to unfamiliar settings. In the calm of that transition, William Howard Taft began a new chapter of public service, one that would deepen his experience, shape his understanding of governance, and prepare him for responsibilities still unimagined. His call to Washington had not marked the end of his judicial career, but rather the expansion of his service into a broader arena. And as he departed the capital, the quiet assurance that had always guided him continued to define his path, leading him gently toward a future that awaited with its own steady unfolding. When William Howard Taft accepted the responsibility of overseeing civil governance in the Philippine Islands, he stepped into a role unlike any he had held before. The journey across the Pacific carried him far from the familiar landscapes of Cincinnati and the structured quiet of the courtroom. Yet, as with every stage of his life, he approached the transition with steadiness, guided by the same principles that had shaped his work since youth. The task awaiting him was complex. To help establish a civil administration in a place recovering from conflict and adjusting to a new political reality. But Taft remained centered in the belief that careful judgment, patience, and respect for structure could bring stability to even the most unfamiliar setting. The archipelago greeted him with a climate, culture, and daily rhythm distinct from anything he had previously known. The humid air, the sound of tropical rains, and the vibrant movement of life in Manila created an environment far removed from the temperate routines of the American Midwest or the structured calm of New England. Yet Taft adapted with quiet resilience. He understood that effective administration required not only legal and organizational insight, but a willingness to listen observe, and learn from those who had long called the islands home. His appointment as head of the Philippine Commission placed him at the center of efforts to guide the transition from military to civil government. This responsibility demanded a steady temperament, one able to balance firmness with understanding. Taft worked closely with local leaders, American officials, and representatives of various communities, seeking to build systems that reflected both fairness and practicality. He spent long hours reviewing reports, studying the history of the islands, and considering how best to adapt American administrative practices to a very different cultural environment. Central to his approach was the belief that lasting governance required meaningful cooperation. Taft sought opportunities to involve residents of the islands in administrative roles, recognizing that civil structures must reflect the participation of those they served. He held meetings with community leaders, educators, and legal professionals, listening carefully to the concerns they expressed. Though the challenges were significant, he maintained a steady confidence that gradual, thoughtful development could lead to stability. The Commission devoted considerable attention to questions of infrastructure, education, and legal organization. Taft supported the development of public schools, believing that education formed the foundation of an informed and capable citizenry. He encouraged improvements to transportation systems, recognizing their importance in supporting communication and commerce across the archipelago. In matters of law, he worked with colleagues to establish courts capable of ensuring fairness, drawing upon his own judicial experience to help build a system that balanced structure with local context. Throughout his service, Taft displayed a temperament that fostered trust. He approached disagreements calmly, addressed concerns with patience, and avoided imposing sudden changes. His manner reassured those around him, conveying that decisions would rest on careful consideration rather than impulse. Even in moments of difficulty, he maintained a consistent sense of purpose. Observers noted that his composure remained intact amid the demands of long days and complex administrative challenges. Taft's time in the islands also deepened his understanding of cultural differences and the need for sensitivity in governance. He visited towns and provinces beyond Manila, learning about local traditions, agricultural practices, and community structures. These experiences allowed him to appreciate the diversity of the archipelago and to understand more fully the responsibilities carried by a civil administrator. In his reports to Washington, he emphasized the importance of gradual development and warned against unrealistic expectations. His recommendations reflected both pragmatism and respect for the people he served. Despite the heavy demands of his position, Taft approached his work without any sense of personal grandeur. He viewed himself as a steward rather than a ruler, responsible for ensuring continuity and fairness. His decisions were shaped by a consistent awareness that the foundations he helped establish would influence the future of the islands long after his departure. This perspective guided him in nurturing administrative stability, promoting civic participation, and fostering institutions designed to endure. During his years in the Philippines, Taft formed relationships with colleagues who valued his sincerity and reliability. Among them was Major General Arthur MacArthur, whose military perspective sometimes differed from Taft's civil approach. Yet even in such differences, Taft maintained his characteristic steadiness, recognizing that the transition from military to civil authority required cooperation rather than conflict. His calm manner helped facilitate discussions that shaped the evolving political landscape, and his leadership also earned the trust of Washington, where officials viewed him as someone who could carry out sensitive responsibilities with discretion and judgment. His reports, written with precision and clarity, reflected a deepening administrative insight. Over time, he became not only the head of the Philippine Commission, but also the first civil governor-general of the islands, a role that underscored the government's confidence in his abilities. life in the Philippines brought personal challenges as well. The tropical climate affected his health, and the demands of travel and long days of work left him with little time for rest. Yet he seldom spoke of discomfort. Instead, he maintained a routine that allowed him to fulfill his responsibilities with unwavering dedication. His letters home revealed a fondness for the people he served and a sense of purpose that helped him endure the physical strain. Taft's work in the islands lasted several years, gradually shaping him into a leader prepared for broader responsibilities. His administrative experience deepened significantly, and his understanding of governance expanded beyond the boundaries of the judiciary. He learned to navigate the complexities of international administration, to coordinate diverse departments, and to balance competing interests with fairness. These skills would later prove essential, as his path brought him into new arenas of public service. By the time he prepared to leave the Philippines, Taft had contributed to the establishment of structures that supported education, transportation, law, and public administration. His efforts formed part of a larger process that continued beyond his tenure, yet his influence remained evident in the measured approach he had encouraged. He had not sought recognition, but the steady fulfillment of duty had earned him widespread respect. As he prepared to return to the United States, Taft carried with him the lessons of his years abroad. He had learned that governance, whether local or international, required patience, respect, and a willingness to listen. He had discovered new dimensions of public responsibility, and had expanded his understanding of how institutions function in diverse settings. These experiences would shape his perspective in all the years that followed. His departure from the Philippines was quiet, reflecting the understated manner that marked his service. He left behind an administrative framework strengthened by his work, and he returned to the United States prepared for whatever responsibilities awaited him next. The journey ahead would bring him closer to the centre of national leadership, yet the steady, deliberate qualities he had displayed in the islands would continue to guide his life. And so, with the calm assurance that had defined his career, William Howard Taft concluded his tenure as Governor-General, carrying forward the experience of a distant archipelago into the broader realm of American governance. When William Howard Taft returned from his years in the Philippine Islands, he brought with him not only the experience of administering a distant territory, but also a reputation for steady judgment that had grown quietly during his service. Those years overseas had shaped his understanding of governance in profound ways, deepening his appreciation for structure, cooperation, and the gradual unfolding of civil institutions. As he stepped once more onto American soil, he did so with a broadened perspective and with the calm assurance that came from having guided a complex administrative transition with patience and restraint. Upon his return, national leaders welcomed him with sincere respect. His reports from abroad had conveyed a commitment to fairness and a sense of responsibility that aligned closely with the needs of the federal government. Among the leaders who regarded him highly was Theodore Roosevelt, whose energetic approach to national reform often intersected with Taft's measured style. Though their temperaments differed, Roosevelt moving swiftly and with enthusiasm, Taft preferring deliberation, they shared a belief in the importance of strong, effective governance. It was Roosevelt who approached Taft with the invitation to join the cabinet as Secretary of War. The position was not limited to military concerns alone. At the dawn of the 20th century, the United States Department of War oversaw not only the nation's land forces, but also significant administrative responsibilities connected to overseas territories. Roosevelt believed that Taft's balanced temperament and experience in civil governance made him uniquely suited to guide the department at a time when the United States was still adjusting to its new international obligations. For Taft, the invitation required thoughtful consideration. He had always regarded himself as a jurist by inclination, drawn to the quiet order of the courtroom and the structured progression of legal reasoning. Yet he also understood that service sometimes demanded movement between roles. He approached the offer with the same steady reasoning that had characterized his earlier decisions. After discussions with his family and reflection on the responsibilities involved, he accepted the position, seeing in it an opportunity to continue the work he had begun in the Philippines, helping the nation guide its administrative systems with fairness and stability. His transition into the cabinet unfolded without haste. Taft familiarized himself with the structure of the department, reviewed its ongoing projects, and learned about the logistical demands of military administration. He understood that effective leadership required comprehension of both strategy and detail. As he settled into his new role, he approached each responsibility with calm deliberation, building upon the experience he'd gained overseas. One of the central tasks presented to him involved the continuation of civil development in territories still under American influence. His years in the Philippines had shown that stable governance required attention to education, infrastructure, and legal systems. He worked to support these efforts from Washington, collaborating with officials both in the capital and abroad. His correspondence reflected the same careful thought he had shown during his service in Manila, clear, methodical, and anchored in the belief that administrative progress must unfold steadily. Another area of responsibility involved the construction of the Panama Canal, a project that carried immense significance for the nation's economic and strategic future. As Secretary of War, Taft was asked to oversee elements of the canal's administration, helping to coordinate the work that would eventually link the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. He approached this task with measured attention, reviewing reports from engineers, studying logistical challenges, and offering guidance that reflected his preference for orderly planning. Though the project itself demanded great energy, Taft contributed to it with the same quiet steadiness that had characterized every stage of his public service. His work brought him into frequent contact with Roosevelt, whose dynamic leadership style contrasted with Taft's more reserved manner, yet their collaboration was marked by mutual respect. Roosevelt valued Taft's dependability and trusted him to carry out tasks requiring judgment and discretion. Taft, in turn, appreciated Roosevelt's ability to inspire national confidence and advance administrative reforms. Their partnership demonstrated how differing temperaments could complement one another when united by shared purpose. Within the War Department, Taft became known for his thoughtful management. He listened carefully to the concerns of officers, studied the organization of units, and worked to ensure that decisions were grounded in both fairness and practicality. His administrative memoranda revealed a commitment to clarity. He sought to create systems that could function smoothly beyond the tenure of any one leader, believing that institutions gain strength from consistency and thoughtful design. At the same time, his personal relationships within the department grew in depth and mutual regard. Staff members valued his approachable demeanor and the calm he brought to discussions. Taft neither hurried decisions nor allowed them to linger unnecessarily. Instead, he moved through his responsibilities with a quiet rhythm, maintaining trust through reliability. When challenges arose, he addressed them with the same patience he had demonstrated abroad, believing that steady attention could resolve difficulties more effectively than forceful intervention. His years as Secretary of War also allowed him to broaden his understanding of the nation's role on the world stage. Through meetings with diplomats, military advisors, and representatives of various governments, he gained a clearer sense of the interconnected responsibilities that shaped international relations. He observed how policies crafted in Washington influenced events far beyond the continental borders and recognized the importance of careful judgment in navigating these complexities. During this period, Taft continued to maintain strong personal ties to his family. His wife, Nellie, supported his work with her characteristic energy and intellectual engagement. Their home life offered a counterbalance to the pressures of public service, grounding him in familiar routines and reinforcing his calm perspective. Conversations with his children brought moments of quiet reflection, allowing him to step briefly away from the demands of national administration. As the years progressed, as Taft's role within the cabinet grew in significance, Roosevelt increasingly relied upon him for advice on matters requiring not only administrative expertise, but also discretion and sound judgment. And though the political world around him grew more active, often energized by Roosevelt's initiatives, Taft remained steady in his approach. He viewed each responsibility through the lens of long-term institutional stability rather than short-term accomplishment. In time, Roosevelt began to express publicly his belief that Taft possessed the qualities necessary for even higher office. This suggestion emerged not through Taft's own ambition, but through the president's confidence in his character. Roosevelt saw in him someone capable of guiding the nation calmly, yet someone whose respect for law and measured temperament could provide balance in moments of political transition. Taft received these expressions with humility, continuing to focus on the responsibilities immediately before him. As his tenure as Secretary of War drew onward, the qualities Taft had cultivated throughout his life became ever more visible. Patience, fairness, and steadfast devotion to duty. These years formed a bridge between the judicial past he had once known and the national leadership roles that would soon come into view. Yet in the midst of these developments, Taft remained grounded in the quiet certainty that service, approached with humility and care, could steady even the most demanding responsibilities. In this chapter of his life, he stood at the intersection of military oversight, civil governance, an emerging political possibility, unhurried, balanced, and guided always by the principles that had shaped him from his earliest days. The journey that had brought him from the riverbanks of Ohio to the center of national administration now pointed toward a broader horizon, one that would require him to step further into public life than he had ever anticipated. As William Howard Taft continued his work in the federal government, the currents of national life began to shift around him in ways that he had not sought, yet could not entirely avoid. His years as Secretary of War had strengthened his reputation as a figure of dependable judgment, someone who approached every task with patient attention and a deep respect for the institutions he served. While political life in Washington often moved with speed and passion, Taft remained steady, guided by the certainty that public responsibility must rest upon balance rather than ambition. Yet the political climate at the dawn of the 20th century was one of rising energy. The Republican Party was navigating its own evolution, shaped by reform movements, economic change, and debates over the nation's growing international presence. Many within the party, including prominent leaders, looked to Taft as someone capable of bridging these shifting priorities with calm and unity. They admired his administrative experience, his thoroughly legal approach to public questions, and the absence of personal rivalry in his conduct. These qualities, rare in the charged atmosphere of national politics, carried a reassuring weight. President Theodore Roosevelt, whose confidence in Taft had developed over years of shared work, became increasingly vocal in his belief that Taft should succeed him. Roosevelt's energetic style and bold initiatives had reshaped the public's expectations of the presidency. Yet he believed that Taft's temperament, steady, moderate, and grounded in law, could preserve stability while continuing the work of responsible reform. Taft, however, viewed such suggestions with characteristic caution. He felt no personal calling toward electoral politics and remained deeply attached to the prospect of returning someday to judicial service. But as conversations around him grew more insistent, He understood that the question of his candidacy could not be avoided indefinitely. The months that followed reflected the gradual unfolding of political expectations, as invitations arrived from party leaders across the country, encouraging him to consider the presidency. Newspapers speculated about his intentions, portraying him as a natural successor to Roosevelt's policies. Taft responded with restraint, neither embracing nor dismissing the possibility. He believed that such decisions required thoughtful reflection rather than swift agreement. Privately, he continued to confide that the judiciary remained the field closest to his heart. Yet he also recognized that circumstances sometimes placed individuals where their service was most needed, even when the roles differed from personal preference. As the political season advanced, Taft began to travel more frequently, meeting with citizens, officials, and community representatives across the United States, as these journeys allowed him to observe firsthand the concerns and hopes that shaped public life at the turn of the century. He saw communities affected by industrial expansion, farmers confronting economic uncertainty, and workers navigating the tensions of labor disputes. He listened more than he spoke, absorbing the varied experiences of Americans living through a time of rapid transformation. These encounters deepened his understanding of the responsibilities that national leadership demanded. Despite the growing attention, Taft maintained an unhurried pace in shaping his decisions. He continued his duties within the administration, offering careful thought to ongoing matters of governance. Only gradually did he come to accept that the momentum surrounding his potential candidacy had become both steady and widespread. Now Roosevelt's endorsement carried significant weight, but Taft did not rely upon it as a sole guide. Instead, he reflected on whether he could approach the presidency with the same calm diligence that had defined his service in every other role. In time, he consented to allow his name to be placed before the party, making the choice with humility rather than enthusiasm. He viewed candidacy as an extension of duty, not as a pursuit of personal ambition. This perspective shaped the manner in which he approached the campaign. He avoided flamboyant declarations and left the more vigorous aspects of political strategy to others. His speeches, when given, emphasized stability, fairness, and the importance of strong institutions. Observers noted the gentle tone of his addresses, which lacked the urgency of competing voices yet conveyed a sincerity that resonated with many Americans. The presidential campaign moved forward with the steady progression typical of the early 20th century. Political gatherings unfolded in town squares, auditoriums, and convention halls. Taft met with citizens from various regions, listening to their thoughts and responding with measured clarity. His understanding of both domestic and international issues allowed him to speak knowledgeably yet calmly about the country's direction. Supporters found reassurance in his steadiness, while others regarded him as a figure uniquely suited to maintain continuity in a period marked by reform and expansion. One of the defining features of this period was the contrast between Taft's quiet nature and the more animated voices that surrounded him. Roosevelt's continued support remained influential, yet Taft neither sought to imitate his predecessor's energy nor attempted to distance himself from it. Instead, he remained true to his own disposition, deliberate, balanced, and grounded in the belief that the presidency required thoughtful stewardship more than dramatic gestures. This distinction shaped voters' perceptions, offering them a candidate whose style differed from the prevailing norms of political excitement. As the National Convention approached, the momentum behind Taft's candidacy grew more certain. Delegates recognized him as someone who could unite various factions within the party, balancing reformist enthusiasm with conservative steadiness. His record in the Philippines, his service in the federal government, and his years on the bench provided a foundation of trust. When the convention finally assembled, the atmosphere carried a sense of inevitability. After the votes were cast, Taft emerged as the nominee, receiving the decision with characteristic modesty. The general election campaign unfolded with its own steady rhythm. Taft's opponent represented a different vision for the country, offering vigorous advocacy for economic change and social reform. Taft's approach remained grounded in continuity, emphasizing careful governance and the preservation of institutional integrity. He spoke of strengthening the nation's legal frameworks, supporting responsible economic development, and promoting fairness in federal administration. Throughout the campaign, he maintained the calm tone that had always defined his public presence. As Election Day approached, the country reflected on its choices. Voters considered the paths laid before them, one marked by energetic calls for transformation, the other by patient commitment to order and stability. When the ballots were counted, Taft was elected President of the United States. The result did not prompt any grand celebration on his part. He accepted the office with quiet solemnity, aware of the responsibilities that awaited him and mindful of the trust placed in his leadership. His election marked the culmination of a path he had not actively pursued yet had gradually accepted as a matter of service. Standing on the threshold of the presidency, he felt the weight of a role that demanded both vision and restraint. The journey from Cincinnati to Washington, from the courtroom to overseas administration, and from cabinet service to national leadership, had unfolded step by step, each phase preparing him for the next in ways he could not have foreseen. And now, with the calm resolve that had guided him throughout his life, William Howard Taft prepared to enter the White House, ready to apply the same principles of fairness, steadiness, and thoughtful governance that had shaped every chapter of his long public career. When William Howard Taft prepared to enter the presidency, he did so with a calmness that reflected the entirety of his life's path. There was no rush of personal triumph, no display of political celebration. Instead, he approached the transition with the steady awareness that public office was a responsibility to be fulfilled with clarity and restraint. The months between election and inauguration allowed him to reflect quietly upon the work ahead. Though his experiences had prepared him for leadership, he remained mindful that the presidency carried expectations different from any he had previously encountered. The inauguration took place in early March, as winter lingered in the capital. The ceremony unfolded with the traditional solemnity of the moment. Crowds gathered, listening as the new president took the oath of office. Yet even in this moment of national attention, Taft maintained the measured composure that had defined him. He spoke of the importance of continuity, of strengthening legal and administrative systems, and of approaching the duties of the presidency with patient deliberation. Observers noted that his tone reflected neither urgency nor dramatic ambition. It conveyed instead a commitment to orderly governance and a desire to honour the constitutional framework he had long respected. The early days of his administration were marked by careful organisation. Taft reviewed the responsibilities of the executive departments, met with advisers, and considered how best to distribute the work that awaited him. He valued structure and took time to understand the details of each issue before forming a decision. His cabinet appointments reflected this approach. He chose individuals whose experience and temperament aligned with his own preference for balanced, methodical administration. Among them were those who could continue the reform initiatives that had begun under Theodore Roosevelt, while grounding them in stable legal foundations. One of the first major matters before the new administration was the tariff. For years, debates over a tariff adjustment had shaped national politics, influencing commerce, labour, and public sentiment. Taft approached the issue with characteristic patience, seeking a measured revision rather than a sweeping transformation. He worked with Congress to consider the details of proposed legislation, reviewing reports and listening to the perspectives of various regions. The resulting measure, though imperfect in the eyes of many, reflected his belief in gradual adjustment rather than abrupt change. It demonstrated his preference for steady refinement of policy instead of forceful alteration. Another area of early focus involved the federal courts. Having spent much of his life within the judicial world, Taft understood deeply the importance of efficiency and clarity in the court's functioning. He supported measures that would relieve congested dockets and improve procedural organisation. While these efforts unfolded gradually, they reflected an ongoing commitment to strengthening the institutions that upheld the legal framework of the nation. His interest in judicial administration would remain a constant thread throughout his presidency. Foreign affairs also required his attention, though his approach differed from the energetic style that had characterized earlier years. His belief in what came to be known as dollar diplomacy reflected an emphasis on stable economic relationships rather than dramatic political intervention. This approach aimed to encourage cooperation through financial investment and development, offering nations a means of growth supported by peaceful association. While its results varied, the policy demonstrated Taft's preference for quiet stability over confrontation. He believed that prosperous, well-structured relationships among nations formed a foundation for long-term peace. Within the United States, Taft turned his attention to matters of conservation and natural resource management. The reform spirit of the era had brought new awareness to the importance of preserving lands, forests, and waterways. Taft continued to support this movement, though in a more restrained manner than his predecessor. He established reserves, strengthened administrative oversight, and emphasized the importance of balancing human use with preservation. These actions reflected his belief that policy should unfold through structured processes rather than through sudden declarations. As his administration progressed, differences in temperament between Taft and some reformers became increasingly visible. His measured manner sometimes appeared, to those seeking rapid change, as caution or reluctance. Yet his approach arose not from opposition to reform but from his belief that enduring progress required firm legal foundations. He preferred to build systems gradually, ensuring that each step rested upon clear authority. This distinction, subtle yet significant, had shaped both his public image and the tone of his administration. Taft's relationship with his cabinet and advisers reflected his steady leadership style. Meetings were conducted with calm deliberation. He listened attentively to points raised, asked questions to clarify uncertainties, and resisted forming opinions before considering all relevant information. Those who worked with him noted the absence of haste in his decisions. He believed that thoughtful judgment required time, and he granted himself the quiet space necessary to reach conclusions grounded in principle. Life within the White House unfolded with a rhythm shaped by both public expectation and private routine. Taft approached his daily work with the same sense of structure he had maintained throughout his career. He rose early, dedicated time to correspondence. He attended meetings and reviewed documents with unwavering patience. In the evenings, he often sought moments of quiet reflection, retreating from the demands of public life into the steadiness of familiar routines. His family provided support during these years, offering balance amid the weight of leadership. The presidency also required him to navigate the complexities of public opinion. Newspapers followed his actions closely, interpreting his deliberations through the rapidly shifting lens of early 20th century politics. Some praised his thoughtful nature, others questioned whether his restrained style could satisfy the energy of the reform era. Taft remained largely unmoved by such commentary, focusing instead on fulfilling his responsibilities with fairness and clarity. He believed that the measure of an administration lay not in immediate approval, but in the stability of the decisions made. Throughout these early years, the president encountered challenges that demanded both diplomacy and patience. Disagreements within his own party sometimes complicated efforts to advance legislation. Regional concerns required sensitive attention, yet he continued to work steadily, guided by a belief that respectful negotiation could yield balanced solutions. His temperament allowed him to remain composed even when debates grew intense. Those who observed him frequently remarked that moments of tension rarely altered his manner. As the midpoint of his term approached, Taft had established a presidential style marked by quiet persistence. His administration emphasized law, structure, and continuity. He believed that presidential power should be exercised within clear constitutional limits, and that long-term progress rested upon strengthening institutions rather than expanding personal authority. This philosophy distinguished his leadership in ways both subtle and enduring. Looking back on these early years of Taft's presidency, one can see how each experience built upon the foundations laid throughout his life. From his childhood in Cincinnati to his judicial service and his work abroad, every chapter had prepared him for the steady work of national leadership. The presidency did not alter his fundamental nature. Instead, it offered him a broader stage upon which to apply the principles he had long held: patience, fairness, and devotion to the quiet strength of well-ordered governance. And so, as his administration continued, Taft moved forward with the same calm assurance that had guided every earlier step, unhurried, deliberate, and firmly rooted in the belief that the nation's progress depended upon steady hands and thoughtful stewardship. As William Howard Taft settled more deeply into the responsibilities of the presidency, the landscape of American political life continued to shift around him. The opening years of the 20th century had ushered in what came to be known as the Progressive Era, a period marked by calls for reform, scrutiny of concentrated economic power, and an expanding public interest in social and governmental change. Within this setting, Taft found himself navigating a complex terrain. His temperament inclined him toward gradual improvement and careful legal structure, while many voices within the country sought rapid action and visible transformation. The contrast between these approaches shaped much of the domestic environment in which his administration unfolded. Central to these debates was the matter of economic regulation. Public concern about large corporations and industrial trusts had grown steadily in the preceding decades, and federal action had become a significant expectation. Taft approached this responsibility not as a crusade but as a legal question. He believed that enforcement of existing statutes, interpreted with precision, offered the soundest means of ensuring fairness in commerce. Under his leadership, the government pursued a series of antitrust cases that reflected this philosophy. Each case was approached with methodical attention. Investigators assembled evidence. Attorneys analyzed the relevant laws, and decisions were made through processes grounded in established legal standards. Although these efforts aligned with the progressive expectation of curbing excessive corporate influence, the manner in which Taft carried them out differed from the dramatic style some reformers preferred. His actions were steady rather than forceful, built upon patient preparation and adherence to judicial procedure. Yet the results were substantial. His administration initiated more antitrust cases than those brought in earlier years, demonstrating his commitment to ensuring that economic power operated within legal boundaries. Nevertheless, because he avoided public confrontation, his actions were sometimes misunderstood. Those who favoured energetic declarations failed to recognise that his quieter methods often achieved the same ends through more measured means. Labour issues also occupied Taft's attention during his presidency. Workers across the country faced the challenges of industrialisation, including long hours, uneven safety conditions, and an evolving relationship between labour and management. Taft believed firmly in the importance of peaceful negotiation as a means of addressing these concerns. He supported mechanisms that allowed disputes to be examined calmly, without resorting to the disruption of production or the escalation of tension. His legal training shaped his understanding of labour relations as a question of structure, one that required clear rules, accessible processes, and thoughtful oversight. To support these aims, he encouraged improvements in the mediation systems available to both workers and employers. He believed that the government could offer a steadying influence, helping to resolve disputes through impartial assessment rather than force. His approach reflected a quiet conviction that stability depended upon fairness, and that fairness emerged most reliably from calm, orderly negotiation. While these efforts did not resolve all labour challenges of the era, they contributed to the development of a more structured system for addressing industrial conflict. Agricultural concerns also played a significant role in the domestic policy debates of Taft's presidency. Many farmers faced fluctuating crop prices, limited access to credit, and the effects of expanding transportation networks. Taft supported initiatives designed to strengthen agricultural infrastructure, including the development of rural postal delivery and the expansion of farm education programs. He viewed these measures as essential to ensuring that rural communities remained stable participants in the nation's economy. His efforts reflected a recognition that progress must extend beyond urban centres, supporting the broader range of livelihoods that shaped American life. Another significant domestic issue concerned tariff restructuring. While this topic had been prominent at the beginning of Taft's term, its effects continued to ripple through political discussions. Adjustments to tariffs influenced both manufacturers and consumers, touching nearly every part of economic life. Taft believed that tariff revision should be approached with careful study, they're balancing regional interests and maintaining the stability of federal revenue. His measured approach, however, sometimes placed him at odds with those who expected more decisive shifts. These tensions contributed to the broader debates within his political party, revealing the challenges of leading in a moment shaped by diverse expectations. The atmosphere of these years was further shaped by the rise of new political voices. Reformers across the country continued to advocate for a variety of causes, including banking regulation, conservation, and improved oversight of public resources. Taft supported many of these aims, though he preferred structured implementation to sweeping pronouncements. His legal background inclined him towards solutions rooted in statute and procedure. He believed that good governance rested upon consistent rules rather than personal energy. This philosophy sometimes led to misunderstandings with individuals who believed that strong leadership required more visible momentum. Conservation policy remained an area of active attention during Taft's administration. Concerns about forest management, mineral resources, and land preservation drove discussions across multiple departments. Taft supported the continued protection of natural areas, emphasizing the importance of thoughtful planning and determining how public land should be used. His approach balanced preservation with development, reflecting his belief that resources should be managed in a way that would serve future generations as well as the present. He expanded national forests, strengthened administrative processes, and encouraged scientific evaluation of land use. Yet, as with many areas of his presidency, differences in temperament between Taft and some reform advocates contributed to political tension. While he valued their commitment, he often found their expectations for rapid action difficult to reconcile with the legal and administrative realities he believed essential to long-term success. These differences did not reflect disagreement over fundamental values so much as variation in method. Taft's calm, steady approach contrasted with the more forceful style favoured by others, leading to periodic misunderstandings about his intentions. The tension between these competing expectations became evident within the broader political landscape. Some observers viewed Taft's methods as too cautious, while others appreciated the grounding he brought to a period of intense national change. Through it all, he remained committed to his philosophy that reliable progress came not from sudden shifts, but from methodical refinement. This belief guided his decisions in every area of domestic policy, shaping the tone of his presidency and reflecting the temperament that had defined his life. Within the White House, Taft followed a routine shaped by quiet study, steady paperwork, and careful meetings with advisors. He approached issues not as problems to be solved quickly, but as questions requiring thorough understanding and balanced consideration. His days were filled with correspondence, reports, and discussions that unfolded at an even pace. Those who worked with him noted his patience and his clear respect for the processes of governance. These years also saw growing divisions within his political party. Differing philosophies regarding reform, economic policy, and the role of the federal government created factions that increasingly diverged. Taft attempted to maintain unity through moderation, but the pressures of the era made this task difficult. Still, he continued to approach every decision with the same commitment to fairness, believing that the strength of the nation rested upon institutions that operated consistently and without turbulence. By the close of this period, Taft's domestic policies had reflected the careful balance between continuity and reform. His administration strengthened legal structures, expanded regulatory frameworks, and supported improvements in multiple sectors of American life. Yet the nuances of his approach, quiet, deliberate, and anchored in law, led some to overlook the depth of these accomplishments. In the context of the Progressive era, Taft stood as a figure who believed that genuine, lasting progress rested upon stability. His presidency, shaped not by dramatic gestures but by patient attention to detail, demonstrated a belief in governance as a continuous and measured effort, and though debates and disagreements surrounded him, his steadfast devotion to orderly administration remained unchanged, guiding him calmly through the challenges of domestic leadership. As William Howard Taft continued to guide the nation through the early years of his presidency, the realm of foreign affairs emerged as an area demanding steady attention. The United States, having grown economically and politically over the preceding decades, found itself increasingly involved in the affairs of distant regions. For Taft, whose temperament inclined toward measured judgment and structural clarity, the challenges of international relations required the same calm approach he had brought to every stage of his career. His guiding belief that stability could be strengthened through cooperation and orderly development shaped the tone of his foreign policy. One of the most recognizable aspects of Taft's international outlook came to be known as dollar diplomacy. Though the term was not of his own choosing, it reflected his belief that economic partnership could promote peace more effectively than political confrontation. He understood that nations often sought stability through the development of infrastructure, industry, and financial systems. If the United States could support such development through investment and technical guidance, diplomatic relationships might deepen without the tensions that accompanied military involvement. Taft approached these possibilities with characteristic deliberation, reviewing proposals, studying reports, and encouraging cooperation grounded in mutual benefit. This philosophy found expression in various regions, including Central America and the Caribbean, where financial uncertainty had created instability. Taft believed that economic assistance, conducted with respect for sovereignty and legal structure, could help strengthen institutions in these nations. His administration worked to support loans, develop transportation networks, and assist in the establishment of fiscal systems designed to promote reliability. Although the results varied from place to place, the approach reflected Taft's conviction that stable governance rested upon sound economic foundations. He viewed these efforts not as intrusions but as forms of partnership, shaped by the quiet belief that prosperity could support peace. At the same time, the administration's foreign policy extended beyond financial matters. Relations with major global powers continued to evolve, including interactions with China during a period of significant internal transformation. The early 20th century saw increasing international interest in trade and development within China, and Taft supported efforts that encouraged open access for multiple nations. His administration advocated a policy that sought to preserve equal opportunity in commerce, believing that such openness would foster balance and prevent conflict. These efforts grew from his broader principle that cooperation, when grounded in fairness, could guide international relations towards stability. Another area of foreign engagement involved the Pacific region, where strategic considerations had become increasingly important to the United States. Taft understood the significance of maritime routes and economic connections. He supported administrative continuity in the islands already under American governance, encouraging improvements in infrastructure and legal systems in a manner consistent with his long-held belief in gradual structured development. His approach avoided dramatic changes, instead emphasizing the need to sustain orderly administration and patient progress. Thus, relations with Japan also demanded careful attention during Taft's presidency. The early decades of the century marked a period of evolving connections between the two nations, shaped by trade, immigration concerns, and broader strategic considerations. Taft approached these matters with calm diplomacy, seeking to maintain peaceful relations through understanding and negotiation. He believed that mutual respect formed the foundation of international stability, and he resisted actions that might generate unnecessary tension. His manner remained consistent, thoughtful, deliberate, and grounded in the belief that lasting cooperation depended on steady communication. Throughout his presidency, Taft met frequently with diplomats, advisors, and representatives of foreign governments. These meetings unfolded in the same calm manner that shaped all his interactions. He listened with attentiveness, asked questions that revealed his interest in the underlying structure of each issue, and offered responses grounded in careful reasoning. Observers noted that he did not rush toward decisions, believing instead that discussions must unfold with patience to ensure lasting clarity. This approach stood in contrast to more forceful diplomatic styles of the era, yet it reflected his lifelong devotion to thoughtful stewardship. One of the significant undertakings of his administration involved continued progress on the construction of the Panama Canal, a project that carried implications not only for American commerce, but for global transportation. While the engineering work proceeded under specialized supervision, Taft's role involved oversight of administrative and diplomatic aspects. He reviewed reports on labor conditions, financial requirements, and international agreements associated with the canal's operation. His involvement reflected a belief that infrastructure on such a scale must rest upon stable organization and clear oversight, principles consistent with his broader approach to governance. These years also saw developments in the relationship between the United States and Mexico, where political change was unfolding. Taft observed these events with caution, mindful that foreign policy required respect for national sovereignty, as well as attention to cross-border stability. He resisted calls for intervention, believing that diplomatic restraint often served peace more effectively than decisive action. His stance reflected a broader pattern in his presidency, the belief that stability arose from calm engagement rather than rapid exertion of force. His approach to foreign policy was rooted not in dramatic gestures, but in the quiet conviction that law, economic structure, and cooperative effort formed the basis for peaceful relations. He sought to strengthen international bonds through agreements that reflected fairness, through support for economic development, and through the steady maintenance of diplomatic channels. While some observers of the era preferred more visible demonstrations of strength, Taft remained dedicated to the subtler forms of influence that emerged from order and clarity. Within the White House, the rhythm of foreign affairs blended into the broader routine of daily administration. As Taft reviewed correspondence from ambassadors, studied reports from distant regions, and considered recommendations from advisers. He approached each matter with the same careful pacing that shaped his domestic decisions. His days were filled not with dramatic announcements, but with the accumulated work of steady governance. Advisers often remarked upon his ability to absorb extensive information without haste, a quality that had defined him since his earliest days of legal study. Despite the calmness of his demeanour, foreign policy during Taft's presidency did not proceed without challenge. The international world of the early 20th century was marked by shifting alliances, emerging powers, and the growing complexity of global interactions. Taft understood that diplomacy required both patience and adaptability. When difficulties arose, whether financial, political, or territorial, he responded with deliberation, seeking solutions grounded in structure rather than emotion. His belief that clear systems supported peaceful relations guided him through these challenges, shaping each decision with his characteristic steadiness. By the conclusion of this phase of his presidency, Taft's foreign policy had left an imprint defined by continuity and quiet influence. He had supported economic development as a means of strengthening international ties, advocated openness in global trade, encouraged stability through cooperative engagement, and overseen significant infrastructure with long-term global impact. Though some of his efforts faced criticism from those who preferred swifter action or more pronounced assertiveness, Taft remained confident in the value of measured diplomacy. His approach mirrored the entirety of his public life, thoughtful, patient, and guided by a profound respect for structure. As the nation continued to evolve within an increasingly interconnected world, Taft's foreign policy reflected a belief that progress must rest upon foundations strong enough to sustain the uncertainties of the future. Through each interaction, each agreement, and each patient decision, he affirmed the enduring importance of steady leadership in the quiet realm of diplomacy. As William Howard Taft moved through the middle years of his presidency, the United States entered a period marked by shifting expectations, rising public voices, and a growing sense that the nation was adjusting to new social and political currents. The steady rhythms of earlier decades were giving way to an era defined by reform movements, expanding civic participation, and heightened scrutiny of national institutions. Taft, with his preference for order and calm progression, found himself guiding the country through a time when many citizens sought rapid change. The contrast between these desires and his own measured approach created a landscape in which both continuity and transformation moved side by side. Public sentiment during these years reflected a remarkable blend of optimism and restlessness. Industrial growth had reshaped daily life, drawing populations towards cities, altering patterns of work and creating new expectations of government oversight. Newspapers, reaching wider audiences than ever before, amplified concerns about business practices, labour conditions, and the influence of concentrated economic power. Citizens looked to national leaders with increasing hope that long-standing issues might be addressed. In this environment, the presidency became not only a seat of administration, but a focal point for the aspirations of a rapidly changing nation. Taft understood the significance of these developments, yet his temperament inclined him toward responses rooted in law, structure, and gradual improvement. He believed firmly that the executive branch must act within constitutional boundaries, and that lasting reform required careful design rather than swift action. While he shared many of the goals that reformers championed, he approached each issue with deliberation, seeking solutions grounded in enduring principles, That this contrast between method and demand formed one of the defining tensions of his presidency. Within his own political party, differing philosophies began to reveal themselves more sharply. The reform impulses that had energized earlier years continued to grow, encouraged in part by the lingering influence of earlier leadership. Many individuals saw the progressive movement as a vital force for modernization, hoping it would resolve questions of corporate power, social welfare, and democratic participation. Others believed that the pace of change had already reached a level that called for caution. Taft found himself positioned between these perspectives, seeking to preserve unity while adhering to his conviction that governance must rest upon steady foundations. Debates over policy reflected this contrast. Decisions related to tariffs, or conservation, judicial structure, and administrative oversight carried implications far beyond the specific legislation. They signalled the broader direction of national governance. When Taft supported measures that aligned with his belief in deliberate improvement, some perceived these actions as insufficiently bold. When he acted to uphold constitutional limits, some believed he was resisting reform. Yet Taft continued to view each decision through the lens of careful stewardship, trusting that clarity and restraint would best serve the country in the long term. One significant episode that shaped public perception involved the administration of public lands and resource management. Differences in approach among officials, influenced by contrasting interpretations of conservation policy, led to public debate that extended far beyond the details of administrative procedure. Within this discussion, Taft sought to uphold processes that reflected fairness and legal clarity. He respected the work of dedicated conservation leaders while also ensuring that administrative actions adhered to statutory boundaries. The resulting debates reveal the challenge of balancing preservationist enthusiasm with the procedural requirements of federal governance. They also illustrated how differing expectations among reformers and administrators could lead to misunderstanding, even when broader aims aligned. At the same time, the country witnessed growing attention to questions of political participation. Discussions surrounding senatorial elections, campaign finance, and direct democracy illustrated the desire among many citizens to reshape the structure of federal representation. Taft approached these debates with thoughtful caution. He recognized the sincerity of reform efforts, while maintaining that constitutional change must rest upon deliberation rather than impulse. His calm approach sometimes placed him at odds with advocates who believed that urgency was essential. Yet he continued to emphasize the importance of careful consideration, believing that the strength of the nation required stability even during periods of significant public discussion. Relations with members of Congress also reflected the evolving political environment. While Taft worked diligently to maintain constructive dialogue, differing priorities between the executive and legislative branches occasionally led to tension. He remained committed to cooperation, yet he also upheld his understanding of presidential responsibility. He sought neither confrontation nor personal advantage. Instead, he approached each interaction with regard for the institutional roles defined within the Constitution. His respect for these boundaries contributed to the thoughtful, measured tone of his leadership, even when legislative negotiations proved challenging. The press played an increasing role in shaping public understanding of these developments. Newspapers and magazines, energized by investigative reporting and expanding readerships, examined government actions with unprecedented intensity. Their interpretations influenced public sentiment, sometimes accelerating the pace of political discussion. Taft, though attentive to the shifting atmosphere, did not allow such commentary to dictate his decisions. He maintained his commitment to evidence, procedure, and legal structure, believing that these elements formed the most reliable path toward long-term progress. During these years, Taft continued to engage with communities across the country, travelling to meet citizens, observe regional concerns, and support public works. These journeys provided him with a deeper view of the nation's social landscape. He visited developing cities, agricultural regions, and areas shaped by new industries. Everywhere he travelled, he encountered Americans adapting to the demands of a new century. These experiences reinforced his belief that the country required stable institutions capable of supporting economic development and civic participation. He saw firsthand the importance of reliable infrastructure, fair labour practices, and educational advancement. These interactions informed his understanding of national policy, grounding his decisions in the everyday realities of American life. Even as the nation's political tone grew more energetic, Taft remained guided by the principles that had shaped his character since childhood: patience, fairness, and respect for order. He understood that enthusiasm for reform played an important role in democratic progress. Yet he also believed that lasting improvement required structure. His presidency reflected the balance he sought to maintain between these forces, offering calm leadership during a period in which the nation's expectations were expanding rapidly. In the broader sweep of American history, these years represented a moment of transition. The United States was emerging from its early industrial decades and moving toward a more interconnected, more participatory society. Questions of economic power, social responsibility, and constitutional structure were being asked with increasing intensity. Taft, rooted in a different tradition of governance, sought to honour the stability of long-standing institutions while acknowledging the need for continued refinement. His approach reflected a deep understanding that change, to endure, must unfold within frameworks capable of sustaining it. As his presidency moved closer to its later stages, Taft faced a political landscape transformed by growing divisions, rising expectations, and the complex interplay of continuity and reform. Yet through each challenge, he maintained the calm, the deliberate presence that had defined his entire public life. His leadership during this period demonstrated that even in moments of transition, steady judgment offers a grounding influence, quietly shaping the nation's path through careful thought, patient engagement, and unwavering respect for the structures that support democratic life. As the final year of William Howard Taft's presidency approached, the nation found itself moving into a moment of unusual political complexity. The quiet steadiness that had defined his leadership now met a landscape shaped by restlessness, reformist enthusiasm, and deepening divisions within the political climate. The election of 1912 would become one of the most distinctive contests in American history, a convergence of personalities, philosophies, and national expectations that unfolded gradually, was shaped not by a single event but by the accumulation of many small and steady shifts. Taft had never pursued the presidency out of personal ambition, and as he entered the campaign season, he carried with him the same reluctance that had accompanied his earlier acceptance of the office. His temperament inclined toward judicial reflection rather than political competition. Yet the responsibilities of the presidency required him to stand for re-election if called upon, and he approached this duty with his characteristic patience. He understood that continuity in government often provided stability during periods of national uncertainty, and he believed that offering himself for a second term reflected a respect for institutional order rather than a pursuit of personal achievement. The political landscape, however, had changed since the contest 4 years earlier. The progressive movement had grown in strength, giving voice to Americans who felt that economic and social change required swift and decisive leadership. Many of these individuals looked not to Taft but to the former president, whose energetic style had once guided the nation with forceful momentum. As conversations increased among reform-minded citizens, the possibility arose that the former president might once again enter the political arena. His influence remained strong among a portion of the electorate, and his presence in public discussion shaped perceptions of the Taft administration in ways both subtle and direct. As these debates unfolded, Taft remained committed to his own understanding of leadership, calm, legalistic, and grounded in the belief that constitutional structure formed the true foundation of national stability. He continued to carry out the responsibilities of his office, reviewing legislation, meeting with advisers, and approaching each issue with the same deliberate clarity that had guided him since his earliest days. Yet he could not help but observe the shifting atmosphere. Newspapers increasingly speculated about the intentions of others, and political gatherings across the country echoed with questions about the future direction of the nation. When it became clear that the former president intended to seek the nomination of their shared political party, Taft faced a difficult moment. He maintained deep respect for his predecessor, recognizing the sincerity of his convictions and the influential role he had played in shaping national policy. Yet Taft also believed firmly in the importance of continuity and institutional respect. He approached the situation without bitterness, understanding that political life often generated competing visions. Even as tensions emerged within the party, his tone remained calm, grounded in the conviction that personal disagreement must not overshadow the responsibilities of governance. The months leading to the party's national convention revealed increasing division. Supporters of the former president voiced their hope for renewed momentum in reform efforts, while others commended Taft's steady approach. Delegates arrived at the convention with strong opinions, and the proceedings unfolded with a mixture of anticipation and uncertainty. Taft himself observed the developments with quiet detachment, trusting the process rather than attempting to influence it through pressure or persuasion. He believed that decisions made through established procedures, however difficult, carried legitimacy that personal intervention could not replace. Eventually, the party's convention resulted in Taft's nomination. The outcome reflected not triumph, but the culmination of institutional processes that he respected deeply. Yet the decision also led to a notable shift in the political landscape. Supporters of the former president, unwilling to accept the convention's result, formed a new political party, carrying forward their candidate under an independent banner. This development created a three-way contest unprecedented in its structure, with Taft representing the traditional Republican platform, the former president leading a newly formed progressive movement, and the Democratic nomination going to Woodrow Wilson, an academic-turned-governor whose calm articulation of reform ideals appealed to many citizens seeking balance between structure and change. The emergence of three major candidates reshaped the tone of the campaign. Public gatherings across the country reflected a combination of excitement and uncertainty. Citizens weighed competing visions for the future, listening carefully to discussions about economic fairness, political participation, and the role of government in a rapidly evolving society. As these conversations unfolded, Taft maintained his characteristic approach, restrained, thoughtful, and grounded in legal principle. His speeches emphasized the importance of constitutional limits, the need for steady administration, and the belief that reform must proceed through deliberate processes. He did not attempt to match the enthusiasm of his opponents, choosing instead to present his philosophy with quiet clarity. The campaign's unusual structure placed Taft in a challenging position. His own party was divided, with significant portions of its membership aligned elsewhere. Yet even in this difficult circumstance, Taft remained composed. He viewed the election not as a personal trial, but as a moment in the nation's ongoing political development. He believed that leadership must be guided by principle regardless of circumstance, and he carried this belief into every public appearance. His calm demeanour became a defining feature of his campaign, contrasting with the more vigorous presentations of his opponents. As the election neared, it became apparent that the division among his supporters had narrowed Taft's path. The Democratic candidate, benefiting from the split within the Republican ranks, gained momentum across multiple regions. Taft observed these developments with steady acceptance. He did not express frustration or alarm. Instead, he continued to meet with citizens, fulfill his administrative responsibilities, and uphold the tone of quiet responsibility that had always shaped his public life. When election day arrived, the results reflected the unique circumstances of the campaign. The Democratic candidate secured a decisive victory, while the split between Taft and the Progressive ticket reshaped the distribution of votes. Taft received the outcome with dignity, acknowledging the will of the electorate and expressing gratitude for the opportunity to serve. His response reflected not disappointment, but the calm understanding that democratic governance rested upon the peaceful and respectful transition of leadership. In the weeks that followed, Taft prepared to leave the White House. He approached this transition with the same steady composure that had guided him through every stage of his career. He ensured that administrative responsibilities were fulfilled, offered thoughtful cooperation to his successor, and reflected quietly on the years he had spent guiding the nation. His belief in fairness, constitutional integrity, and orderly governance remained unchanged. Even in defeat, his commitment to the structure of the nation's institutions stood firm. The election of 1912, with its unusual divisions and its convergence of distinct leadership philosophies, marked a turning point in American political life. For Taft, it represented both a personal and public chapter, one that tested his temperament, revealed his steadfastness, and ultimately prepared him for the next stage of service that awaited beyond the presidency. Though he soon would step away from the executive branch, he did so with the calm assurance that his path was continuing in accordance with the principles that had guided him since youth: steadiness, integrity, and devotion to the enduring structure of law. When William Howard Taft prepared to leave the White House in early 1913, he did so with a calmness shaped by years of public responsibility. The transition from the presidency to private life contained none of the bitterness that sometimes accompanies political defeat. Instead, Taft accepted the change with a quiet sense of balance, understanding that public service unfolds in many forms and that stepping away from one role often opens the way to others. As he departed Washington, he looked forward not to rest alone, but to a return to the world of scholarship, teaching, and thoughtful reflection, an environment that had long appealed to his steady temperament. Shortly after leaving office, Taft accepted a position as a professor of law at Yale Law School, returning to an institution that had shaped his early intellectual life. Yale welcomed him warmly, yet recognizing not only his years of public service, but also his lifelong commitment to legal clarity and institutional soundness. For Taft, the return to academia represented a kind of homecoming, an opportunity to step once more into a setting where ideas could be examined carefully and where students could be guided toward professional discipline. The transition from national executive to legal educator unfolded smoothly. Taft approached the role of professor with the same methodical attention that had characterized his earlier work. He prepared his lectures carefully, reviewing cases, outlining principles, and organizing lessons with clarity. Students who attended his classes often remarked on his calm manner, noting that he presented complex legal concepts with steady patience. Yet he did not seek to impress through grand rhetorical flourishes. Instead, he spoke plainly, allowing the structure of the law to emerge naturally through careful explanation. The classroom environment suited him. He enjoyed interacting with students, answering their questions and guiding them toward deeper understanding. His years in public office gave him a wealth of practical insight that enriched his teaching, though he offered such experiences not as points of personal pride but as illustrations of legal principles in action. Students sensed his sincerity and respected both his knowledge and his unwavering courtesy. In lectures and discussions, he emphasized the importance of fairness, judicial restraint, and the careful interpretation of statutes, values that had shaped his entire career. In addition to classroom teaching, Taft became a frequent public speaker during these years. Universities, civic organizations, and law societies across the country invited him to address audiences on topics related to law, government, and international relations. These engagements allowed him to share his measured perspective with a broad range of listeners. As with his teaching, his speeches carried the unmistakable tone of calm reflection. He spoke not to persuade urgently, but to clarify thoughtfully, presenting ideas in a manner that encouraged contemplation rather than intensity. Taft's public addresses often centered on the structure of government, the role of the judiciary, and the value of constitutional processes. He believed deeply in the stability provided by well-designed institutions, and he sought to remind audiences of the importance of maintaining both balance and restraint in public affairs. His listeners, whether students, scholars, or citizens, found reassurance in his steady voice. At a time when political debates continued to unfold with vigour, Taft offered a perspective rooted in continuity and principle. During his post-presidential years, Taft also engaged in writing. He contributed articles to legal journals, authored essays on constitutional interpretation, and continued to refine his thoughts on the administration of justice. His writing mirrored his speaking, structured, patient, and grounded in long experience. He avoided polemical arguments, choosing instead to examine issues through careful reasoning. His works provided a valuable resource for students of law and scholars of government, reflecting his enduring devotion to thoughtful analysis. Life in New Haven brought a quieter rhythm than the years spent in Washington. Taft enjoyed the change. He valued moments of unhurried reading, the opportunity to walk through the university grounds, and the chance to engage in reflective conversation with colleagues. Friends observed that he seemed at ease in this new chapter, appreciating the slower pace and the renewed focus on intellectual pursuits. Yet he remained active in national discourse, continuing to speak publicly and maintaining correspondence with individuals involved in government and academia. During this period, Taft's interest in judicial administration deepened further. He had long believed that the federal courts required structural reform to function more smoothly. His experience on the appellate bench and his years as president had given him insight into the complexities faced by judges throughout the country. He advocated for clearer procedures, better coordination among courts, and greater attention to the administrative needs of the judiciary. His proposals reflected a vision of the judicial system as an orderly institution capable of serving the public with efficiency and fairness. Taft's calm and thoughtful leadership did not go unnoticed. His influence within the legal community grew steadily, and he became a respected figure among scholars and practitioners alike. He was invited to deliver keynote addresses at conferences, participate in academic ceremonies, and consult on matters of judicial reform. But each engagement provided him with an opportunity to reinforce the importance of measured thinking in public affairs. He approached these responsibilities with modesty, grateful for the opportunity to contribute in ways that suited his temperament and skills. The years following his presidency also offered Taft time to reconnect with family. His wife Nellie remained an active and supportive presence, and their home life regained the intimacy that public office had often disrupted. Their children, growing into their own careers and responsibilities, visited frequently. These moments of family connection brought Taft quiet joy, grounding him amid the demands of teaching and public speaking. He appreciated the balance between professional work and personal life, recognizing that both contributed to his sense of fulfillment. But despite the peaceful rhythm of his academic career, Taft remained attentive to national developments. He followed discussions in Congress, monitored judicial decisions, and reflected on international events. His interest in public affairs never diminished, though he no longer carried the burdens of executive responsibility. He observed these matters with the perspective of someone who had seen government from multiple angles, understanding both its strengths and challenges. This vantage point allowed him to offer informed commentary, always presented with calm humility. In time, the possibility of returning to government service began once again to surface. Leaders within the legal and political spheres, aware of his expertise and steady temperament, considered him for positions that required both judgment and administrative insight, and Taft did not seek such roles on his own, yet he remained open to the idea that further service might be asked of him. His devotion to public duty had been a defining element of his life, and he understood that such calls sometimes arrived unexpectedly. As his years at Yale continued, Taft's influence as a lecturer, writer, and public thinker expanded. He found satisfaction in guiding students, shaping academic dialogue, and contributing to discussions of national governance. These were years of reflection, years in which he could examine the principles that had shaped his life and share them with a new generation. The peaceful atmosphere of academia provided a setting in which his thoughtful nature could flourish. Yet the path ahead still held one more great responsibility, one that would draw upon the full breadth of his experience and fulfill an aspiration he had quietly carried for many years. The next chapter of his life would take him back into the heart of the nation's legal system, offering him the opportunity to serve in the role he had always regarded as the highest expression of judicial stewardship. As William Howard Taft continued his work as a scholar and public speaker, the years following his presidency unfolded with a steady rhythm that suited him well. His days were filled with lectures, thoughtful writing, and the calm routines of academic life at Yale. Yet beneath this peaceful surface, a quiet sense of possibility began to re-emerge, an awareness that the judicial world, long his natural home, might once again call upon him. He had devoted much of his life to the law, ere approaching it with the same patience and clarity that had shaped his character since youth. Though he did not seek a return to public office, he recognized that the direction of his life often followed the needs of the nation rather than his personal preference. During these years, Taft continued to reflect on the structure of the judicial system. His experience on the appellate bench, combined with his deep understanding of federal administration, had given him a unique perspective on how the courts might operate more smoothly. He saw opportunities for refinement in the organization of judicial circuits, the responsibilities of judges, and the procedures governing appeals. In his lectures and writings, he discussed these ideas with clarity, always emphasizing that effective justice required both sound legal interpretation and thoughtful administration. These reflections earned him increasing attention from leaders in government and the legal community. Judges, scholars, and public officials recognized that Taft's understanding of judicial processes was both practical and expansive. He possessed a rare combination: the mind of a jurist, the experience of a national administrator, and the temperament of someone who approached challenges with steady, measured calm. As discussions quietly circulated in political and legal circles, the idea of his returning to judicial service began to take shape. National events also influenced this moment of transition. The country continued to evolve, facing questions of economic development, social change, and international engagement. The administration of President Warren G. Harding sought leaders who could strengthen institutions and contribute to national stability. Harding, aware of Taft's long record of public service and his profound respect for constitutional structure, saw in him someone uniquely suited for a position of judicial leadership. Conversations began discreetly, reflecting a thoughtful examination of Taft's qualifications and the needs of the nation's highest court. For Taft, the possibility of returning to the judiciary stirred feelings of both humility and deep fulfillment. Throughout his life, he'd regarded service on the Supreme Court of the United States as the most meaningful role he could ever hold. From his earliest years in Cincinnati, through his education at Yale, his time as a judge in Ohio, and his service on the appellate bench, he had viewed the Supreme Court not as a place of personal distinction, but as the embodiment of the nation's legal foundation. Its work represented the steady application of constitutional principles across generations, carried out with deliberate, thoughtful care, qualities that resonated deeply with his own nature. Though the idea of appointment to the Supreme Court had arisen earlier in his career, circumstances had drawn him into other forms of service. Now, in his later years, the possibility returned with new clarity. Harding's administration considered candidates for the position of Chief Justice, seeking someone who could guide the court with balance and integrity. Taft's name emerged naturally, supported by decades of public respect. His judicial writings, his administrative experience, and his devotion to legal stability all pointed toward the same conclusion. He was well prepared for this final stage of service. As these discussions moved forward, Taft remained outwardly calm. He continued his academic work, lecturing and writing with the same steady focus that had characterized his post-presidential years. Yet those close to him understood that the opportunity to serve as Chief Justice would represent the fulfillment of a lifelong aspiration. He did not speak of it with excitement or anticipation. Instead, he approached the possibility with quiet gratitude, recognizing both the honor it conveyed and the responsibility it entailed. When the formal offer arrived from President Harding, Taft accepted with measured sincerity. His acceptance reflected neither ambition nor surprise, but a profound sense of fitting purpose. While after decades of public service, spanning roles in law, international administration, executive leadership, and academia, his path had led him back to the realm where he felt most at home. The Supreme Court offered him a place where he could apply his knowledge, his temperament, and his devotion to orderly governance in a setting aligned fully with his strengths. News of his nomination was received with respect across the legal community. Many saw his appointment as the natural culmination of a career grounded in fairness, patience, and unwavering commitment to constitutional principles. His reputation for integrity reassured those who valued the stability of the judiciary. Colleagues from earlier chapters of his life, including judges, administrators, and former students, he expressed confidence that he would guide the court with calm deliberation and administrative clarity. Following Senate confirmation, Taft prepared to leave Yale once more. His departure was marked by quiet appreciation from the faculty and students who had come to value his presence. Though he would miss the peaceful rhythms of academic life, he recognized that the role ahead required his full attention. The transition unfolded without haste, reflecting the same steadiness that shaped every change in his life. He gathered his notes, concluded his lectures, and bid farewell to the community with warmth and gratitude. As he prepared to enter the Supreme Court, Taft reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. Each stage of his life had contributed to his understanding of law and governance. His years as a young lawyer in Cincinnati taught him the value of diligence. His judicial roles deepened his respect for precedent and clarity. His administrative work in the Philippines revealed the importance of structure in civil institutions. His presidency expanded his perspective on national and international affairs. and his time in academia allowed him to refine his thoughts and share them with others. Now, at last, these experiences converged into a single purpose. The role of Chief Justice would allow him to bring together everything he had learned across decades of service. He approached this transition with quiet fulfillment, aware that the work ahead would serve not only the present generation but many to come. As Taft prepared to take his oath and assume leadership of the court, he carried with him the calm assurance that had defined his entire life. He knew that the responsibilities would be substantial, requiring patience, clarity, and unwavering devotion to law. Yet he welcomed the opportunity with a steady heart, ready to enter a chapter that represented not a new direction, but a return to the judicial calling that had shaped him from the very beginning. When William Howard Taft entered upon his duties as Chief Justice, he did so with a sense of calm fulfillment that few roles in his long public life had ever matched. He had served in many capacities: teacher, administrator, diplomat, judge, and president. Yet this final responsibility felt to him like a natural culmination of everything he had learned. The seriousness of the work, the stability of the institution, and the measured cadence of judicial decision-making aligned perfectly with the temperament he'd cultivated since childhood. As he stepped into the quiet, polished chambers of the nation's highest judicial body, he felt a deep sense of restoration, as though returning at last to a home long prepared for him. The work of the Chief Justice carried with it responsibilities that extended far beyond the writing of opinions. Taft now found himself guiding not only the deliberations of the court, but also the administration of the federal judicial system as a whole. His earlier reflections on court organization, which had occupied so much of his academic and administrative thought, now became practical tasks of daily importance. He approached each with steady patience, ready to bring structure where needed, and clarity where processes had become strained by time and accumulation. In his new role, Taft presided over conferences with the same quiet firmness that characterized his judicial temperament. He believed that discussion among justices should unfold with civility, openness, and attention to principle. His leadership encouraged orderly examination of each case, with time allotted for reflection rather than rapid judgment. Those who served with him noticed the disciplined way he guided conversation, offering gentle redirection when necessary, and creating space for each justice to express views without pressure. His steady presence lent a quiet rhythm to the court's internal work, shaping its deliberations with a sense of calm continuity. The cases that came before the court during Taft's tenure reflected the complex and evolving nature of early 20th century America. Questions regarding interstate commerce, taxation, labor relations, and constitutional interpretation arrived with regularity. The nation was modernizing, expanding, and redefining itself in ways that generated new legal challenges. Taft approached each case with meticulous care. He studied the records thoroughly, examined precedents with the attention of a scholar, and wrote opinions that reflected both clarity and restraint. His decisions revealed a mind grounded in the belief that law must balance principle with function, preserving continuity while adapting thoughtfully to new circumstances. One of Taft's most significant contributions to the judiciary lay in his quiet yet determined efforts to strengthen its administrative structure. Recognizing that the federal courts required improved coordination, he advocated for reforms that would allow judges to manage caseloads more effectively and communicate more consistently. His efforts eventually contributed to the establishment of the Judicial Conference of the United States, an institution that brought judges together to consider matters of administration and policy. This development fulfilled one of Taft's long-held aspirations: the creation of a body capable of guiding the judiciary with collective insight and shared responsibility. In addition to administrative reforms, Taft supported improvements to the physical and procedural infrastructure of the courts. He believed that the dignity of the judiciary rested not only in its decisions, but also in the environment in which its work unfolded. His efforts contributed to the planning and eventual construction of a separate building for the nation's highest tribunal, one that would symbolize the independence and continuity of the judicial branch. Though he would not live to see its completion, the planning reflected his deep commitment to preserving the integrity of the institution he served. Life as Chief Justice brought with it a new rhythm for Taft. His days were filled with reading, writing, and quiet contemplation. He found comfort in the routine, the early hours spent reviewing briefs, the measured discussions in conference, and the long afternoons shaping opinions with clarity of thought. He approached each task with the same steady diligence that had guided him since his youth. Those who observed him noted the sense of contentment that accompanied his work. The demands of the office were substantial, yet he carried them with the calm assurance of someone whose life had prepared him well. His role also placed him at the centre of national ceremonial occasions, though he never sought the spotlight that accompanied them. He presided during significant moments of public transition, including the inauguration of President Calvin Coolidge, handling the proceedings with his characteristic quiet dignity. These occasions allowed him to serve the nation in a public way, while remaining within the judicial sphere he valued so deeply. The collegial atmosphere Taft fostered among the justices contributed to the court's stability during his tenure. His leadership style encouraged thoughtful exchange rather than confrontation. He believed that differences of opinion could be addressed constructively, and that the court's authority depended upon the clarity and consistency of its reasoning. Under his guidance, the justices worked with a sense of shared purpose, even when their views diverged. Taft understood that law gained strength through the thoughtful reconciliation of differing perspectives, and he modelled this approach in every aspect of his work. While his responsibilities as Chief Justice were extensive, Taft maintained an interest in the broader questions of governance and administration. He continued to reflect on the structure of the federal government, the evolution of constitutional interpretation, and the relationship between law and society. Yet he expressed these thoughts with restraint, mindful of the need to preserve the impartiality of the judicial office. His public remarks, when made, were measured and focused on the importance of institutions rather than personal views. He believed that the judiciary served the nation best when its members upheld both independence and humility. As the years passed, Taft's health began to show signs of strain. The steady routine of judicial work, though intellectually fulfilling, carried physical demands that grew more evident with time. Yet he continued his duties with quiet perseverance, guided by the conviction that service required endurance. His colleagues observed his dedication, noting that he seldom allowed discomfort to interfere with his responsibilities. Even as his strength gradually diminished, his commitment to the court remained unwavering. In the final years of his tenure, Taft saw the judicial reforms he had long supported take shape. The coordinating body of federal judges he had envisioned began its work, offering guidance on administrative matters across the judiciary. Planning for the new Supreme Court building advanced steadily, promising a home for the court that reflected its dignity and independence. These developments brought him a sense of satisfaction, not because they represented personal accomplishment, but because they strengthened institutions he believed essential to the nation's stability. Through it all, Taft's demeanour remained consistent, calm, deliberate, and grounded in the belief that law provided the steady foundation upon which society could build. His years as Chief Justice allowed him to serve in the role he had always regarded as the highest calling of his life. He had returned to the world of judicial reasoning, contributing his experience and his measured judgment to the nation's most enduring legal institution. As his health continued to decline, Taft recognised that his time on the bench might soon come to a close, yet he faced this transition with the same quiet acceptance that had guided every stage of his life. He knew that institutions endured beyond the service of any one individual, and he found comfort in the continuity of the law. The next chapter would bring this final stage of service gently toward its conclusion, marking the closing years of a life devoted to fairness, stability, and the quiet power of thoughtful governance. In the final stretch of William Howard Taft's service as Chief Justice, he entered a period marked not by sudden change, but by the quiet unfolding of long-considered reforms. Throughout his life, Taft had believed that stable institutions depended upon clear procedures, thoughtful administration, and a willingness to refine long-standing systems when circumstances required it. These convictions guided him in the last great endeavour of his public career, strengthening the structure and efficiency of the federal judiciary. Long before he assumed leadership of the highest court, Taft had reflected on the challenges faced by judges throughout the nation. As a young lawyer, he had observed the importance of predictable procedure. As a trial judge, he had experienced firsthand the delays and inconsistencies that sometimes arose from uneven workloads and gaps in administrative support. His years on the appellate bench had shown him how essential coordination was for ensuring consistent interpretation of the law. These insights accumulated over decades, preparing him for the responsibility he now carried. As Chief Justice, he approached judicial reform with the same patience that shaped every stage of his life. He avoided dramatic proposals, focusing instead on steady improvements that would support fairness across the federal courts. He believed that justice must not depend on the circumstances of a particular courtroom or the pace of a particular district. Rather, it must flow from procedures that operated with clarity and balance. This principle guided his work as he sought to modernize the system without compromising its stability. One of his early efforts involved studying the administrative burdens faced by judges throughout the country. He recognized that some districts carried heavy caseloads that strained their ability to resolve matters promptly, while others moved at a more manageable pace. Taft understood that unequal distribution of responsibility placed pressure not only on individual judges but on the integrity of the judicial process itself. He considered ways to improve coordination among courts, reduce delays, and provide judges with the support necessary to carry out their work effectively. His solution emerged from the belief that judges must have the opportunity to confer, exchange perspectives, and offer guidance on matters of common concern. In this spirit, Taft championed a system in which representatives from various parts of the judiciary could meet regularly to review administrative challenges and recommend improvements. He believed that such gatherings would foster unity among judges and provide a forum for addressing issues too large for any one court to resolve alone. Over time, this idea took form in a national mechanism dedicated to judicial administration, an innovation that would endure long after his tenure. In addition to fostering communication, Taft worked to improve procedural uniformity across the federal judiciary. He saw that inconsistent practices could create uncertainty for litigants and attorneys, leading to confusion and inefficiency. He encouraged efforts to develop clearer rules governing the conduct of cases, the responsibilities of counsel, and the procedures for appeals. These refinements unfolded gradually, shaped by patient deliberation among judges and legal scholars. Taft understood that durable reform required consensus rather than haste, and he allowed the process to mature in its own steady time. He also believed passionately in the need for physical space that matched the dignity of the judiciary. For many years, the highest court had conducted its work within shared government buildings, occupying chambers that did not reflect the independence of the judicial branch. Taft imagined a dedicated structure, one that would symbolize the enduring significance of the law and provide a serene environment for careful deliberation. He worked quietly but persistently to advance plans for such a building, communicating with architects, legislators, and administrators. Though he would not live to see its completion, his vision provided the foundation for the structure that would eventually become the court's permanent home. Central to Taft's work during these years was his belief that the judiciary must remain accessible to the public while maintaining its independence. He understood that respect for the courts grew not from their distance, but from their fairness and consistency. To that end, he supported measures that simplified certain procedural requirements, making it easier for disputes to be heard and resolved without unnecessary delay. At the same time, he resisted efforts that might politicize the judicial process, insisting that legal questions must be approached with impartiality and adherence to principle. His leadership style within the court reflected these values. Colleagues often described his ability to bring order to discussions, to identify areas of agreement, and to clarify points of law with measured precision. He guided deliberations with a gentle firmness, ensuring that each justice had the opportunity to speak while also steering conversations toward resolution. His calm presence helped unify the court during periods of complexity, allowing it to move forward with decisions that carried the authority of thoughtful consensus. As Taft continued to refine judicial administration, he also remained attentive to the cases that came before the court. These matters required careful attention, and he devoted long hours to reviewing records, studying arguments, and writing opinions. His decisions reflected the balanced approach that had defined his earlier judicial work: respect for precedent, a clarity of reasoning, and an understanding of the practical effects of legal interpretation. He believed that the law must remain grounded in established principles, while also adapting, with care, to the evolving needs of society. The gradual changes he encouraged began to take hold across the judiciary. Judges participated more actively in discussions about administration, procedures became clearer and more consistent, and the vision of a coordinated system of federal courts moved closer to reality. These developments did not draw widespread public attention. They unfolded quietly, shaping the foundation of the judicial system rather than its outward appearance. Yet Taft viewed these accomplishments as essential to the health of the nation's legal framework. Throughout these years of service, Taft's dedication to the judiciary never faltered, even as his health began to decline. He continued his work with resolve, supported by a deep sense of purpose that carried him through periods of fatigue. His colleagues observed his persistence with admiration. They understood that his devotion to the court was not merely professional, but personal, rooted in a lifelong belief that the law provided the structure upon which a fair society depended. As time progressed, Taft recognized that the moment would eventually come when he could no longer fulfill his responsibilities with the level of attention he believed necessary. He approached this realization with the same composure that had guided every decision in his life. He understood that leadership included knowing when to step aside, allowing others to carry forward the work he'd begun. His eventual retirement from the court reflected both humility and respect for the institution he cherished. The reforms he championed, the stability he brought to judicial administration, and the thoughtful decisions he authored all formed part of a legacy that would endure long after his service concluded. His work helped shape a judiciary capable of meeting the demands of a modern nation, quietly, steadily, and with unwavering devotion to fairness. As he stepped away from the bench, his life moved gently toward its final chapter, carrying with it the quiet satisfaction of a calling fulfilled. As William Howard Taft stepped away from the duties of the bench, he did so with a sense of quiet completion. The decision to retire had not come abruptly. It had emerged gradually, shaped by the recognition that the work of the court demanded a degree of physical endurance he could no longer reliably maintain. For a man who had spent his life honouring the responsibilities entrusted to him, The choice to relinquish them required careful thought. Yet he accepted this transition with the same calmness that had guided him through all earlier chapters, understanding that institutions endured most gracefully when those who served them recognized the right moment to step aside. In retirement, Taft found himself surrounded by the steady rhythms of private life once more. His days unfolded at a gentler pace, marked by reading, reflection, and the companionship of those closest to him. He continued to follow the progress of the judiciary with quiet interest, observing developments from a respectful distance. Though no longer responsible for shaping the direction of the court, he remained deeply connected to the world of law, reading decisions with the eye of someone who had spent a lifetime interpreting their significance. His correspondence continued as well, filled with the same thoughtful tone that characterized his public communications. Friends, former colleagues, and students sought his perspective on legal questions, institutional matters, and the broader currents of national life. Taft replied generously, offering reflections drawn from long experience. His letters revealed both his deep affection for the judiciary and his enduring belief in the importance of measured governance. Even in retirement, his thoughts returned again and again to the principles that had guided him throughout his career. The physical ailments that had begun in his later years on the bench, however, continued to progress. These difficulties arrived slowly, creating periods of fatigue and discomfort that required him to limit his activities. Yet he faced these changes with characteristic patience. He accepted assistance when necessary, maintained a sense of humour about his limitations, and found comfort in the quiet routines that structured his days. His wife's steady presence offered reassurance, and the support of his family created a sense of warmth around him. These moments of companionship softened the demands of declining health, allowing him to move through each day with serenity. As his strength diminished, Taft spent increasing time in rest, reading newspapers, revisiting favourite books, and enjoying quiet conversations. He reflected often on the path his life had taken, not with pride or regret, but with gentle appreciation for the opportunities he'd been given. He spoke occasionally of the satisfaction he found in the judicial reforms he'd helped advance. He valued the years spent teaching, the work of his presidency, and the challenges of international administration. Each chapter formed a thread in the larger pattern of his life, a pattern shaped by duty, patience, and steady commitment. His reflections extended also to the people he'd worked alongside, fellow judges, cabinet members, students, and public servants across many fields. He regarded these relationships with gratitude, recalling the shared efforts that had contributed to national progress. Though his public roles had been significant, he often emphasized the collective nature of his accomplishments, recognizing that institutions were strengthened not by individuals alone but by the coordinated work of many hands. As winter deepened in the year of his passing, Taft's physical condition grew more fragile. He remained at home, surrounded by familiar rooms and by the care of those who loved him. The world beyond continued to move forward, courts conducting their sessions, universities carrying out their lessons, and public debates unfolding across the country. Taft observed these developments with quiet interest when he could, though he increasingly found peace in silence. The quiet suited him. It reflected the inward calm that had shaped his temperament for decades. When the end came, it arrived gently. Taft passed away in the early spring, his long life concluding with the same quiet dignity that had marked every phase of his journey. He was buried with honour, remembered by colleagues, former students, and citizens across the nation. As news spread of his death, reflections on his life emphasized not only his rare achievement of serving in both the presidency and the judiciary, but also the steadiness with which he had approached every responsibility. His contributions to judicial administration, his devotion to process, and his deep respect for institutional integrity left an enduring imprint. In the days following his passing, many recalled the calmness with which he had shaped the institutions he served. They noted his thoughtful writings, his patient leadership, and the balanced perspective he brought to national affairs. His influence extended beyond the positions he held, touching the legal profession, the practice of public administration, and the evolving structure of the federal courts. The reforms he advanced, though quiet in their development, remained embedded in the nation's judicial framework, providing guidance for generations that would follow. His final years, though slowed by declining health, had brought him the peace of reflection and the comfort of a life completed with purpose. In his quiet retirement, he had looked back upon his journey with a sense of fulfillment, rooted not in personal achievement, but in service to the institutions he cherished. His legacy remained grounded not in the dramatic moments of history, but in the steady shaping of structures that allowed the nation to grow with balance and continuity. And so, as the final chapter closed on Taft's life, the memory that lingered was one of quiet strength, a life marked by deliberate steps, patient consideration, and unwavering devotion to fairness. Through each phase of his long career, he had offered the nation a steady hand, guiding with calm judgment and gentle confidence. His passing marked the end of a remarkable journey, yet his influence endured in the daily workings of the courts, the rhythms of public administration, and the enduring principles of law that he had spent a lifetime upholding. In looking back across the long arc of William Howard Taft's life, a gentle continuity emerges, one shaped less by moments of dramatic change than by the steady presence of a mind devoted to order, fairness, and deliberate thought. His journey carried him through the responsibilities of teacher, governor, diplomat, president, and at last, judge. Yet through each transformation, his character remained constant. He approached every task with a patience that seldom wavered, guided by the belief that public service, at its truest, rested on calm judgment and enduring structures. Taft's legacy continued quietly after his passing. The reforms he advanced within the judiciary became part of the nation's legal foundation, influencing the work of courts for generations. His writings, lectures, and decisions carried forward the clarity he valued, offering guidance to students and scholars long after his voice had grown still. Even the institutions he helped shape reflected the temperament of their steward, measured, balanced, and rooted in respect for the law. In the soft light of historical memory, Taft's life does not shine through sudden brilliance, but through the steady glow of careful stewardship. His contributions endure not as loud echoes, but as the quiet structure beneath the nation's legal and civic life, an enduring reminder of the power found in patience and clarity, and in a lifelong devotion to thoughtful service.